I accidentally spilled coffee on my wife's brother, who became the head of operation 2 days ago. Do you know how expensive my suit is? You're fired, he screamed. I headed to the lobby to meet the investor as scheduled. Ready for our meeting? He asked. I smiled. Sorry, he just fired me. The investor chuckled, held up his phone. Is this the guy who fired Volcom? The coffee was still hot when it left my hand. I remember that detail with crystalline clarity, the way the steam curled up from the paper cup, how the sleeve felt damp against my palm because I'd been gripping it too tightly during the morning meeting that had run 2 hours longer than scheduled. I remember the fluorescent lights humming overhead in that particular frequency that always gave me headaches, and I remember thinking, as I rounded the corner near the executive floor conference room, that I had exactly 7 minutes to make it downstairs to the lobby before the investor arrived. 7 minutes to change everything. I didn't know that yet, of course. How could I? At that moment, I was just another exhausted employee trying to navigate the labyrinth of a company I'd helped build from the ground up. Clutching a mediocre cappuccino from the break room because the espresso machine on the 3rd floor had been broken for 2 weeks and no one had bothered to fix it. That's the kind of detail that matters when you've been with a company for 8 years. You know which machines work, which bathrooms have the good soap, which stairwells echo when you need to take a call your wife shouldn't overhear. You learn the geography of survival. The collision happened in slow motion, the way catastrophes often do when you replay them later in your mind. Marcus, my wife's brother. Though I should probably start calling him the new head of operations, since that's apparently what we're doing now, came barreling around the corner with his phone pressed to his ear. His other hand gesturing wildly at whatever poor soul was on the receiving end of his latest tirade. He'd been head of operations for exactly 47 hours. I knew because Sarah had made me take her out to celebrate 2 nights ago, to some restaurant where they served foam instead of food and charged you for the privilege of being confused. Marcus is finally getting the recognition he deserves, she'd said, her eyes bright with pride that never seemed to extend to my own accomplishments. After everything he's done for this company, everything he'd done, the phrase had stuck in my throat like a bone. But there I was, trying to be supportive, trying to be the good husband, the good brother-in-law, the good soldier who knew his place in the hierarchy of her family's affections. I'd nodded and smiled and raised my glass of wine that cost more than my first car, and I'd watched Marcus bask in the glow of attention he'd been chasing since I'd known him. 4 years of Marcus. 4 years of watching him fail upward, charm his way through incompetence, and collect credit like some people collect stamps. The coffee hit his suit jacket first, a navy blue number that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, custom tailored to emphasize shoulders that had never lifted anything heavier than a briefcase. The liquid spread across the fabric in a dark bloom, seeping into the weave with the kind of permanence that makes your stomach drop. Time snapped back to normal speed as his phone clattered to the marble floor, the screen splintering into a constellation of cracks. What the? He spun toward me, his face cycling through shock, recognition, and then something uglier, something that looked like opportunity. Do you have any idea what you just did? I opened my mouth to apologize, the reflex of the perpetually accommodating, but he was already in motion, already playing to an audience I hadn't noticed. 3 junior executives had materialized in the hallway, drawn by the commotion like sharks to blood in the water. Marcus's voice rose, pitched for maximum impact. Do you know how expensive this suit is? He spread his arms like a prosecutor, presenting evidence, letting everyone see the damage. The coffee stain looked almost artistic against the navy fabric, a Rorschach test of my imminent humiliation. Do you have any idea? Marcus, I'm sorry. You're sorry? He laughed, but there was no humor in it, just the sharp edge of someone who'd been waiting for this moment. Maybe not this exact scenario, but something close enough. Something that would let him exercise the new muscles of his authority. You're sorry? That's what you have to say? The thing about Marcus is that he'd never liked me. Not from the first time Sarah brought me home to meet the family, not through the engagement, not during the wedding, where he'd given a toast that was 30% backhanded compliments and 70% stories about how he'd always protected his little sister from guys who weren't good enough for her. The subtext had been clear. I was one of those guys. I just hadn't realized it yet. And now, here we were, standing in the executive hallway of the company we both worked for, with coffee dripping onto Italian leather shoes that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. "I'll pay for the dry cleaning," I said, keeping my voice level. Around us, I could feel the junior executives leaning in, their phones probably already out, already capturing this moment for the company Slack channel where it would live forever as a cautionary tale. It was an accident. I was heading to accident. "You'll pay for dry cleaning?" Marcus's voice went up another octave. "This is a Brioni suit. Do you know what that means? Of course you don't. This isn't something you pick up at Men's Warehouse during a holiday sale." There it was, the casual cruelty he'd always specialized in. The way he could make you feel small while maintaining plausible deniability. After all, he was just talking about suits, right? Just explaining the difference between quality and whatever it was I wore to work every day. Nothing personal. Except everything was personal with Marcus. "I understand you're upset," I said, and I could hear the words coming out of my mouth from somewhere far away, as if I was narrating my own life. "But I have a meeting in." I glanced at my watch. 5 minutes. An important meeting. If we could discuss this later. "Oh, you have a meeting?" Marcus stepped closer, and I could smell his cologne. Something expensive and aggressive that probably had a name like conquest or domination. An important meeting? Let me tell you something about important meetings. They're for important people. And you know what important people don't do? He waited, letting the question hang in the air like a noose. They don't spill coffee on their superiors. They don't make excuses. They don't show the kind of carelessness that makes everyone wonder what else they're careless about. Projects. Deadlines. Company resources. The accusations were so absurd, they almost made me laugh. Almost. Because I'd spent 8 years being anything but careless. 8 years building systems and processes that had helped take this company from a startup burning through venture capital to a mid-sized operation that was about to land one of the biggest investments in its history. That meeting, the one I had in 4 minutes now. "Marcus, I really need to." "You're fired." The words dropped like stones into still water, rippling outward into silence. The junior executives went completely still, their phones forgotten in their hands. Somewhere down the hall, a printer hummed. The fluorescent lights continued their invisible buzzing. The world kept turning, indifferent to the small apocalypse happening in this hallway. "What?" I heard myself say, though I'd heard him perfectly. "You're fired," Marcus repeated. And now there was satisfaction in his voice. The kind of pleasure that comes from finally saying something you've been holding back for years. Effective immediately. Gross negligence, destruction of company property, insubordination. Insubordination? The word came out sharper than I'd intended. I apologized. I offered to pay for. You argued with me. You made excuses instead of taking responsibility. And frankly, this is just the final straw in a pattern of behavior that I've been documenting since I took this position. That was a lie, a complete, shameless lie. But I could see him believing it as he said it, the way people rewrite history to justify their actions. In Marcus's version of events, I'd probably been a problem employee all along, just waiting for him to arrive and fix things. "I've been with this company for 8 years, I said quietly, too quietly. I needed to speak up, to defend myself. But something was happening in my chest, a tightening, a closing off, as if my body had decided that retreating inward was safer than engaging with this moment. "And in those 8 years, you've been mediocre at best." Marcus crossed his arms, warming to his theme. Coasting on connections, on being in the right place at the right time. Well, times change, leadership changes, and I don't have room on my team for people who can't even carry a cup of coffee without creating a disaster. I looked at his face, my wife's brother's face, and tried to find something there that resembled the family she'd described to me over the years. The protective older brother, the guy who'd helped her through college, who'd been there when their father died. But all I could see was a stranger wearing a coffee-stained suit, drunk on 47 hours of power. "Sarah," I started, because surely invoking his sister would remind him of some basic humanity. "My sister deserves better than someone who's going to be unemployed by lunch," Marcus said. and there was something almost gentle in his voice now, which somehow made it worse. Trust me, I'm doing her a favor. She'll understand when I explain it to her. He was going to explain it to her. He was going to get to her first, to frame the narrative, to make sure that when I got home tonight, if I went home tonight, she'd already been prepared to see me as the careless, argumentative employee who'd finally pushed too far. You can clean out your desk, Marcus continued, brushing at the stain on his jacket as if I'd already ceased to exist. Security will escort you out. I'd say, I'm sorry it had to end this way, but honestly, I think we both know this was coming. He turned to walk away, then paused, looking back over his shoulder with an expression I'd seen before. The same look he'd had at the wedding, at family dinners, at company events where I'd made the mistake of contributing to conversations about strategy or growth. The look of someone who'd won. Oh, and cancel whatever meeting you had scheduled, he said. You don't represent this company anymore. Then he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the marble hallway, leaving me standing there with an empty coffee cup in my hand and 3 junior executives staring at me like I was already a ghost. I should have felt something. Anger, maybe. Fear. The panic of sudden unemployment. But instead, there was just this strange, crystalline calm, as if I'd stepped outside my body and was watching all of this happen to someone else. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out with numb fingers. Investor arrival in 2 minutes. Waiting in lobby. I looked at the message, at the name, at the top of the screen. Then I looked down the hallway, where Marcus had disappeared, probably already on his way to his new corner office to celebrate this victory. And I started walking toward the elevator. The junior executives scattered like pigeons as I approached, unwilling to be associated with the newly terminated. I didn't blame them. In a company like this, proximity to failure was its own kind of contagion. They'd go back to their desks and tell the story, embellishing it, probably, turning my coffee spill into some kind of spectacular disaster, turning Marcus's cruelty into justified management. That's how these things work. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and I stepped inside, watching my reflection in the polished metal. I looked the same as I had that morning, same tie, same slightly rumpled shirt from sitting in a meeting too long, same face that had been showing up to this building for 8 years. But something had shifted. Some weight I hadn't known I was carrying had suddenly lifted, leaving me lighter and more dangerous than I'd been 5 minutes ago. The lobby was cold, air-conditioned to the point of discomfort, all glass and marble and expensive minimalism. And there, sitting in one of the designer chairs that no one ever sat in, checking his phone with the patient demeanor of someone who was used to waiting, was the investor. He looked up as I approached, his eyes crinkling with recognition and something else, amusement, maybe, or curiosity. "Ready for our meeting?" he asked, standing to shake my hand. His grip was firm, confident, the grip of someone who'd built empires and didn't waste time with uncertainty. I smiled. And maybe it was the adrenaline, or maybe it was the 8 years of swallowed frustrations finally finding a voice, but when I spoke, my voice was steady, clear, almost cheerful. "Sorry," I said. "He just fired me." The investor's eyebrows rose. Then he laughed a genuine, delighted sound that echoed off the marble floors. "Is that right?" He pulled out his phone, scrolling through what looked like a message thread. "Is this the guy who fired you?" He turned the screen toward me. And there, in perfect clarity, was a photo of Marcus. The same photo from the company website, updated just 2 days ago, when his promotion had been announced. Head of Operations. The future of the company. "That's him," I confirmed. The investor's smile widened. He typed something quickly, then looked back at me with eyes that were suddenly very, very focused. "Well," he said softly, "this just got interesting." There are moments in life when you realize that what you thought was an ending is actually a beginning. Standing in that lobby, watching the investor's expression shift from amusement to something sharper, something calculating, I felt the ground beneath my feet tilt in a way that had nothing to do with the marble floors or the disorientation of sudden unemployment. It was the tilt of perspective, of seeing a familiar landscape from an entirely different angle and understanding that you'd been reading the map upside down all along. Interesting, the investor repeated, and the word hung in the air between us like a promise or a threat. Sometimes those are the same thing. His name was Richard Chen. I'd known that for 3 months, ever since the first preliminary meeting where he'd expressed interest in acquiring a significant stake in the company. 42%, to be exact. The kind of investment that didn't just inject capital, it shifted power structures, redrew organizational charts, determined who stayed and who became suddenly brutally expendable. But standing there in the lobby, I realized I didn't know him at all. "Maybe we should still have that meeting," he said, pocketing his phone with the kind of casual grace that comes from never doubting you'll get what you want. "Not here, obviously. You know the Sterling? That place on 5th with the private rooms?" I nodded. I knew it. I'd never been there. It was the kind of restaurant where the prices weren't listed on the menu because if you had to ask, you couldn't afford it. But I'd heard Marcus mention it once, dropping the name into conversation the way he dropped all his status symbols. Casually. Constantly. "Meet me there in an hour," Richard said, "and bring everything." Everything? He smiled. And it wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who'd just drawn a winning hand and was deciding how long to let the other players keep betting before he showed his cards. "You've been here 8 years," he said. "I'm guessing you didn't spend all that time just carrying coffee." Then he was gone, walking out through the glass doors into the morning sunlight, leaving me standing there with an empty coffee cup, no job, and a meeting invitation that felt less like an opportunity and more like being recruited into a war I hadn't known was being fought. The security guard was already approaching. I could see him in my peripheral vision. Marcus must have called down, must have wanted to make sure I was escorted out properly, with maximum humiliation. There's a particular kind of shame that comes with being walked out of a building by security, even when you've done nothing wrong, especially then. Because everyone who sees it makes their own assumptions, writes their own story about what you must have done to deserve this. "Mr. Morrison." The guard's voice was professionally neutral, which somehow made it worse. "I'm going to need you to come with me to collect your personal belongings." Personal belongings. 8 years compressed into whatever could fit in a cardboard box. "Of course," I said. "Because what else do you say?" The walk to my desk felt like a funeral procession. Word had already spread, that's the thing about office buildings. Information moves faster than light, faster than sound, faster than anything except maybe shame. People I'd worked with for years suddenly found their computer screens fascinating. The ones who did make eye contact offered those tight, sympathetic smiles that mean better you than me. Only Jennifer from accounting actually spoke to me. "David," she said quietly, catching my arm as I passed her cubicle. "What happened?" "Everyone's saying, coffee," I said simply. "I spilled coffee on Marcus." Her eyes widened. "That's it? He fired you for—" "Apparently my mediocrity has been well documented," I said, and I was surprised to hear something like humor in my voice. Dark humor, maybe, gallows humor, but humor nonetheless. Jennifer glanced at the security guard hovering 3 feet away, then lowered her voice even further. "Listen, I know you've been working on the Cascade project files, the ones for the investor meeting. Marcus has been asking about them all morning. He seems worried." The Cascade project, of course. 3 years of work. 3 years of building a proprietary system that had revolutionized how the company handled data integration. 3 years of late nights and weekend calls and solving problems that Marcus had never even understood were problems. And yes, I had the files. All of them. Backed up on my personal drive because I'd learned a long time ago that trusting company servers was a good way to watch your work disappear when someone decided they wanted credit for it. "Tell him I'm sure he'll figure it out," I said, and Jennifer's expression shifted into something that might have been respect. My desk was exactly as I'd left it that morning, coffee ring on the mousepad, post-it notes arranged in a system that made sense only to me, a photo of Sarah from our honeymoon in Santorini tucked into the corner of my monitor. We were smiling in that picture, genuinely happy, her head on my shoulder and the Aegean Sea behind us like something out of a dream. That was 4 years ago, before Marcus had joined the company. Before I'd learned that marrying into a family meant inheriting all their complications, all their hierarchies, all their unspoken rules about who mattered and who was just along for the ride. I took the photo out of its frame and slipped it into my pocket. Then I started loading files onto my external drive. "Sir, you're only permitted to take personal items," the security guard said, but his heart wasn't in it. I could tell. "This is personal," I said, not looking up from the screen. 8 years of my work, my code, my documentation, none of it belongs to the company. You can check my employment contract. I retained rights to anything I developed independently. That was true, technically. I'd made sure of it when I'd signed on, back when the company was small enough that they were desperate for talent and willing to negotiate. Back when they'd needed me more than I'd needed them. How things change. I'll need to verify that with who? I looked up at him now, and something in my expression made him take a half step back. With the head of operations who just fired me for spilling coffee? Go ahead. Call him. I'll wait. The guard hesitated, probably calculating whether this was worth the hassle, whether he wanted to get in the middle of whatever corporate drama was playing out in front of him. Then he shrugged. "Just make it quick," he said. I made it quick. 18 minutes later, I was walking out through the same glass doors Richard Chen had exited, carrying a cardboard box that contained 8 years of my professional life and an external drive that contained something much more valuable, the truth. The morning had turned gray, clouds rolling in from the east with the promise of rain. There's something about impending weather that makes everything feel more dramatic, more significant. Or maybe that's just what we tell ourselves when we need the universe to acknowledge that something important is happening. I sat in my car in the parking garage and called Sarah. She answered on the third ring, her voice bright and unsuspecting. "Hey, how's your morning going? I was just thinking about you." For a moment, just a moment, I considered lying, telling her everything was fine, that I'd call her later, that we'd talk about it over dinner. But what would be the point? Marcus would tell her his version anyway. Better that she heard it from me first. "Sarah," I said, and something in my tone made her go quiet. Something happened at work. What kind of something? And there it was, the edge of worry, but also something else. Something that sounded like she was already preparing her response, already deciding which side she was on. "I spilled coffee on Marcus. It was an accident. I was rushing to a meeting and he came around the corner and, oh my God, is he okay? That suit he was wearing, David. Please tell me you didn't ruin his suit." Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "What happened then?" Just immediate concern for her brother's suit. I closed my eyes. He fired me. Silence. Then, what? Fired me. Effective immediately. More silence. I could hear her breathing. Could imagine her sitting in our kitchen with her coffee. She always had her coffee at this time. Sitting at the island with her laptop open, probably looking at interior design blogs or planning her next brunch with the women from her yoga class. "David," she said finally, and her voice was careful now, measured. "There has to be more to it than that. Marcus wouldn't just fire someone over a coffee spill. What did you say to him? Were you rude?" I apologized. I offered to pay for dry cleaning. "But what else? Did you argue?" "Marcus said he's been noticing some issues with your performance lately. He mentioned it at dinner the other night." That stopped me. He mentioned it at dinner? When? "When you were in the bathroom, he said he was concerned about some of your recent work, that things were slipping. I told him you'd been stressed, that I'd talked to you about it. But, Sarah," my voice came out harder than I'd intended. "I've been here for 8 years. Marcus has been head of operations for 2 days. What performance issues could he possibly have documented? He's been with the company for 4 years, David. He's seen things. And honestly, maybe this is a good thing. Maybe it's time for you to find something new, something where you're appreciated. Marcus said he'd be happy to give you a reference." I hung up, just pressed the end call button, and sat there in my car, listening to the concrete silence of the parking garage. My phone buzzed immediately, Sarah calling back, but I silenced it. Then I silenced it again, and again. After the 5th call, I turned the phone off completely. There's a particular kind of pain that comes from realizing your partner will always choose someone else over you. Not because they don't love you, necessarily, but because you exist in different tiers of their loyalty hierarchy. Blood versus marriage, family versus choice. And you, no matter how many years you put in, no matter how good you try to be, you're always going to be the one they can sacrifice if it comes down to it. I sat there for 10 minutes, maybe 15, just breathing, just existing in the space between one version of my life and whatever came next. Then I started the car and drove to the Sterling. The restaurant was exactly what I'd expected, all dark wood and leather, the kind of place where conversations were held in hushed tones and deals were made over wine that cost more per bottle than most people's car payments. The hostess looked at me like she could smell my unemployment, but when I mentioned Richard Chen's name, her expression shifted into something approaching respect. "Mr. Chen is waiting for you in the private dining room," she said, leading me through the main restaurant into a corridor lined with doors. Each one presumably concealed similar conversations, similar negotiations, similar moments where people's futures were being decided over artfully arranged food. Richard was sitting at a table set for two, a glass of red wine in his hand, looking completely at ease in a way that made me feel even more disheveled by comparison. He gestured to the seat across from him. "You came," he said. "Good. I wasn't entirely sure you would." "You made it sound like I should," I said, sitting down. "The way you said, 'bring everything.'" "And did you?" I pulled out my laptop, set it on the table next to the empty wine glass the server had already placed in front of me. "Depends on what you mean by everything." Richard smiled. "I've been doing my due diligence on this company for 6 months, he said. "That's what investors do when they're considering this size of investment. We don't just look at the balance sheets and the revenue projections. We look at the people, the systems, the infrastructure. And you know what I found? I waited. I found that almost every significant innovation this company has made in the last 3 years can be traced back to one person, not the CEO. Not the head of operations, neither the old one nor your brother-in-law. Just one person, working quietly, solving problems, building systems that actually work." He paused to take a sip of wine. "That person is you, David." Something in my chest loosened. Not pride, exactly. More like recognition. The simple acknowledgement that someone had seen the work, had understood its value, had traced the invisible lines of creation back to their source. "Marcus doesn't know that, I take it," I said. "Marcus doesn't know a lot of things." That's what happens when you fail upward your entire career. You stop being able to recognize competence in others because you've never had to develop it yourself. Richard leaned back in his chair. "But here's the interesting part. I've been planning to make this investment contingent on certain organizational changes, new leadership in key positions, a restructuring that would actually reward merit instead of nepotism. And Marcus would have been demoted, quietly, professionally, but demoted nonetheless." He smiled. "But that was before this morning, before he decided to fire the one person I'd specifically flagged as essential personnel." I felt something shift in the room, like the air pressure had changed. "Essential personnel," I repeated. "Page 47 of my investment proposal. Any final agreement must include retention guarantees for key technical staff, specifically including David Morrison, whose Cascade project and related infrastructure developments represent the primary value proposition of this acquisition." He pulled out a tablet, swiped through to a document, and turned it toward me. There it was, in black and white, my name, my projects, my value spelled out in the kind of language that made me worth 42% of a company's future. "The board meeting to approve this investment is scheduled for Monday," Richard continued. 3 days from now. Marcus knows this. Everyone knows this. What Marcus doesn't know is that my investment is now contingent on exactly one thing. "What's that?" Richard's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "That I never have to work with him." The wine sat in front of me, untouched, catching the low light from the sconces mounted on the walls of the private dining room. Red wine, expensive wine, the kind that people swirl and sniff and describe using words like earthy and complex, while everyone else just tastes grapes and alcohol. But I wasn't thinking about the wine. I was thinking about the number 42. 42%. That's not just an investment. That's not just capital injection or strategic partnership or whatever euphemism they teach in business school. 42% is control. It's the difference between having influence and having power. It's the line between being a stakeholder and being able to dictate which direction the stake goes. You're telling me, I said slowly, watching Richard's face, for any sign that this was some elaborate joke, that your 42% investment in this company, the investment that everyone's been preparing for, that Marcus has been obsessing over, is contingent on not working with him? Correct, Richard signaled to the server, who appeared like a ghost and poured wine into my glass before disappearing again. More specifically, it's contingent on a complete restructuring of the operations division, new leadership, new accountability measures, a return to actual merit-based advancement instead of the nepotistic disaster that's been unfolding over the past 4 years. 4 years. The exact amount of time Marcus had been with the company. You've been documenting this, I said. It wasn't a question. I document everything. Richard pulled out his tablet again, swiping through what looked like hundreds of pages of analysis. Performance metrics, project completion rates, budget overruns, staff retention by department. The data tells a very clear story. In the 4 years since Marcus joined the company, operational efficiency has decreased by 17%, project delivery times have increased by 23%, and staff turnover in his direct reporting line is running at 41% annually. He turned the tablet toward me again, showing me graphs that looked like a company in decline, charts that painted a picture of systematic dysfunction. Meanwhile, Richard continued, the only departments that have maintained or improved their metrics are the ones Marcus has the least direct control over. The Technical Infrastructure Division, for instance. Your division. At least, it was your division until... He glanced at his watch approximately 90 minutes ago. I picked up the wine glass. Not because I wanted the wine, but because I needed something to do with my hands. Something to ground me in this moment that still felt surreal, like I'd stepped sideways into a parallel universe where the rules I'd been following for 8 years suddenly didn't apply anymore. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because I need you to understand the situation, Richard said. Not the situation you think you're in, fired employee, humiliated by his brother-in-law, probably facing an awkward conversation with his wife about how to pay the mortgage. The actual situation. He leaned forward, and his voice dropped into a register that made me understand why he was successful, why people trusted him with their companies and their futures. You have something Marcus wants, something he desperately needs to maintain the illusion of competence he's been building. The Cascade project files, the integration protocols, the documentation for systems he doesn't understand, but has been taking credit for. And more importantly, you have something I want. What's that? Credibility, institutional knowledge, the ability to actually run an operations division. He paused. I'm not just investing in a company, David. I'm investing in potential. And that potential doesn't exist if the people who actually create value keep getting pushed out by people who just know how to perform value. The server materialized again, placing plates in front of us that looked more like art installations than food. I couldn't even identify what I was supposed to eat, but Richard picked up his fork with the casual confidence of someone who'd eaten in places like this so many times that the pretension had stopped registering. Eat, he said. We have a lot to discuss, and you're going to need your energy. I looked down at my plate, something that might have been fish, surrounded by foams and reductions and microgreens, arranged in patterns that probably had meaning to someone. Then I looked back at Richard. You want me to help you restructure the company, I said. You want me to come back? Not exactly. Richard cut into his food with surgical precision. I want you to do something much more interesting. I want you to let Marcus fail. Publicly, spectacularly, and in a way that makes it impossible for the board to ignore what they've been quietly tolerating for 4 years. The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls closer. I could hear my own heartbeat, or maybe that was just the blood rushing through my ears as I processed what he was saying. You want me to sabotage him? No. Richard's voice was sharp, corrective. I want you to stop protecting him. There's a difference. Sabotage implies actively destroying something. What I'm suggesting is much simpler. Let him try to do the job he claims he's qualified for. Let him stand in front of the board on Monday and explain how the operations division works. Let him present the Cascade Project integration timeline. Let him answer questions about systems he's never understood and didn't build. He took a bite of his food, chewed thoughtfully, then continued. You've been carrying him, David. You and probably half a dozen other people who've been doing the actual work while he collects the credit and the promotions. All I'm asking is that you stop. Let him carry his own weight for once. If he can do it, wonderful. Maybe I've misjudged him. But if he can't, your investment comes with conditions that would remove him from his position. Exactly, Richard smiled. And those conditions would include bringing back certain essential personnel who were wrongfully terminated, with significant compensation increases, of course, and equity stakes. Can't have you building value for the company without actually benefiting from that value. Equity stakes. He was talking about ownership, about me becoming not just an employee, but a partial owner of the company I'd spent 8 years building. I set down my fork, my appetite gone, not from disgust or fear, but from the sheer weight of what was being offered, what was being asked. This is revenge, I said quietly. This is justice, Richard corrected. Revenge implies something disproportionate, something personal. This is just allowing natural consequences to occur. Marcus fired you this morning. If that decision causes problems for the company, problems that affect my investment, then the board needs to address those problems. That's not revenge. That's capitalism. He wasn't wrong, but he also wasn't entirely right. Because yes, this was business. Yes, this was about protecting an investment and ensuring competent leadership. But it was also about something more human, something messier. It was about watching someone who'd always gotten away with everything finally face the bill coming due. It was about power. Why me? I asked. You could hire consultants. You could bring in your own people. You could restructure the entire company without needing anything from me. I could, Richard agreed, but that would take time. It would be expensive. It would create resistance and resentment. People don't like change imposed from outside. They especially don't like investors coming in and cleaning house. He paused. But if the existing leadership demonstrates that they're incompetent, if they fire key personnel out of spite and then can't deliver on basic operational requirements, that's different. That's internal. That's the company fixing its own problems. I understood what he was saying. He needed a catalyst. He needed Marcus to fail in a way that was visible, undeniable, and clearly Marcus's own fault. And I was the person who could make that happen. Not by doing anything, but by simply not doing something. By not saving him. Monday's board meeting, I said. What exactly is Marcus supposed to present? Richard pulled up another document on his tablet. The Standard Operational Overview. Current projects, timelines, resource allocation. But the centerpiece is supposed to be the Cascade Project demonstration, showing how the new integration systems work, explaining the scalability, presenting the timeline for full implementation. It's the main reason the board is excited about my investment. They see it as the key to expanding into new markets, and Marcus doesn't know how any of it works. I'm guessing not, but I'm also guessing he's been telling everyone he does. That's what people like Marcus do. They learn the language, they memorize the keywords, they practice sounding confident, and most of the time, that's enough. Most of the time, no one actually checks whether they understand the substance behind the performance. I thought about the past 4 years, about how many times I'd seen Marcus in meetings throwing around technical terms he'd clearly picked up from my reports, about how many times I'd watched him present my work as if he'd conceived it, developed it, understood it, about how many times I'd sat in the back of conference rooms, listening to him explain systems I'd built using explanations that were just slightly wrong, close enough to sound credible, wrong enough that I knew he'd never actually looked at the code. And every time, I'd stayed quiet. Because what was I going to do? Interrupt my brother-in-law in front of the executive team? Correct my wife's brother and make him look incompetent? That wasn't how families worked. That wasn't how you kept the peace. Except the peace had never been real. It had been surrender disguised as harmony. I have all the files, I said, all the documentation, the code, the integration protocols, everything he'd need to give that presentation. I know. Richard's eyes glittered. And on Monday morning, when he realizes he can't access any of it because it wasn't on company servers, when he realizes the person who actually built these systems is no longer available to save him, he's going to have a choice. Admit he doesn't know what he's doing, or try to fake his way through it. He'll try to fake it, I said with absolute certainty. Marcus always fakes it. And that's when the board will see what I've been documenting for 6 months. That's when my investment becomes contingent on changes they'll have no choice but to make. The server returned, clearing our barely touched plates and replacing them with something that might have been dessert. Richard ignored it, his focus entirely on me, waiting for my answer to a question he hadn't technically asked yet. What happens to Sarah? I said finally. The question I'd been avoiding, the complication that made this more than just business. Richard's expression softened slightly, the first crack in his professional demeanor. That's not my business, or my concern. That's between you and your wife. But David, I'll tell you something I've learned in 20 years of doing this. People show you who they are in crisis. Your wife showed you who she is this morning. She chose her brother over you before you even finished explaining what happened. You can factor that into your decision however you want. He was right. Of course he was right. But right doesn't make things hurt less. I need to think about this, I said. You have until Sunday night, Richard replied. The board meeting is Monday at 9 a.m. If Marcus is going to fail, he needs to fail then. After that, it doesn't matter. The board will have made their decision, the investment will be finalized, and the organizational structure will be locked in for at least the next 2 years. He stood up, pulling out his wallet and leaving cash on the table, even though I was certain this was already being billed to some corporate account. Rich people did that, sometimes left tips that were bigger than the actual check, just because they could. Think about what you want, David, he said. Not what's fair, not what's right, not what keeps everyone else comfortable. What do you actually want? Then he was gone, leaving me sitting alone in the private dining room with untouched dessert and a question I'd been avoiding for 8 years. What did I want? I drove home in the rain. The clouds that had been threatening all morning had finally delivered, turning the city gray and blurred through my windshield. The wipers beat a rhythm that sounded like a clock counting down Sunday night, 48 hours to decide, 48 hours to choose. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway. Sarah's car was gone, which meant she was either at her mother's, which seemed likely, or at Marcus's place, which seemed even more likely. They'd be having their own conversation right now, their own version of this crisis. Except in their version, I was the problem. I was the one who'd screwed up, who'd embarrassed the family, who'd proven that I'd never been good enough in the first place. I sat in my car in my own driveway and called Jennifer from accounting. She answered immediately. David? Oh my God. Everyone's talking about what happened. Are you okay? Define okay, I said. Listen, I need to ask you something. Off the record. Of course. What's Marcus been doing since I left? What's the mood in the office? Jennifer was quiet for a moment, and I could hear the sounds of her moving somewhere private, probably stepping into a conference room or a stairwell. When she spoke again, her voice was low. Panicking, she said. He's been panicking. He called an emergency meeting with the technical team right after you left. Started asking about the Cascade project files, about where everything was stored, about who else had access. And David, no one knew what he was talking about. Everyone thought the files were yours, that you maintained them, that you were the only one who really understood the whole system. What did he say? He said that you'd been hoarding information, that you'd deliberately kept everyone in the dark to make yourself indispensable. He said he was going to have to rebuild everything from scratch because you'd sabotaged the company on your way out. I almost laughed. Almost. Because of course that's what Marcus would say. Of course he'd reframe his own incompetence as my malice. And people believed him? I asked. Some did. The newer people. The ones who don't know you. But David, the people who've been here, the ones who've actually worked with you on projects, they're not buying it. They know who does the real work around here. That should have felt good. It didn't. It just felt tired. Jennifer, if someone asked you hypothetically whether I'd ever done anything to deliberately undermine the company or hoard information, What would you say? I'd say you're the most generous person I've ever worked with. You're the guy who stays late to help other people meet their deadlines. You're the guy who writes documentation even though no one else bothers. You're the guy who makes everyone else look good. She paused. Why? What's going on? Just thinking about my options, I said. Thanks, Jennifer. I hung up before she could ask more questions. The rain was coming down harder now, drumming on the roof of my car like impatient fingers. I wanted 8 years of my work to be acknowledged. I wanted Marcus to face actual consequences, for once in his privileged life. I wanted to stop being the person who swallowed his pride, who kept the peace, who made everyone else comfortable at the expense of his own dignity. I wanted to watch him fail. The thought should have felt vindictive, should have felt small and petty and beneath me. But sitting there in my dark driveway, watching rain blur the windows of the house I'd bought with money I'd earned working for people who'd never appreciated it, I couldn't make myself feel guilty for wanting what I wanted. I pulled out my phone and typed a message to Richard Chen. I'm in. Let him fail. I hit send before I could change my mind. Then I sat there in the rain, watching the message change from delivered to read, and waited for my life to change. My phone buzzed with Richard's response before I'd even put my keys in the ignition. Good. Don't answer any calls from the company this weekend. Let him scramble. Then, a moment later, and David? Get some sleep. You're going to want to be sharp on Monday. I stared at that second message, at the presumption that I'd be able to sleep, that I could just close my eyes and drift off, while my marriage crumbled and my career hung in the balance, and my brother-in-law slowly realized that the empire he'd been building on borrowed expertise was about to collapse, as if sleep was just a switch you could flip, as if your mind could stop racing just because someone told it to. But I drove home anyway, because where else was there to go? The house felt different when I walked in. Not physically, everything was exactly where it had been that morning, from Sarah's coffee cup still sitting on the kitchen counter to the throw pillows arranged just so on the couch, the way she liked them. But there was a quality to the silence that felt accusatory, like the house itself had chosen sides and was disappointed in me. I dropped my box of belongings in the hallway. 8 years in a cardboard box. It should have felt more significant, should have weighed more. Instead, it just looked sad. A desk plant I'd never actually liked. A coffee mug someone had given me at a company holiday party. A framed certificate for excellence in systems integration that Marcus had presented to me 3 years ago at an all-hands meeting, where he'd somehow made my achievement about his leadership. I'd kept it because Sarah had been so proud. See, she'd said afterward, Marcus does appreciate you. You just have to give him a chance. I picked up the frame and dropped it in the trash. Then I went upstairs, took a shower hot enough to hurt, and waited for my wife to come home. She arrived at 7:30, just as the last gray light was draining from the sky. I heard her car in the driveway, heard the garage door open and close, heard her footsteps in the kitchen, heard her pause when she saw the box in the hallway, heard her sigh, that particular sigh that meant she was preparing herself for a conversation she didn't want to have. I was sitting in the living room, in the chair by the window, watching the streetlights flicker on one by one. David! Her voice was careful, controlled, the voice she used when she was trying to be reasonable, which usually meant she'd already decided I was being unreasonable. Are you okay? That's an interesting question, I said, not turning around. Am I okay? Let me think. I got fired this morning. By your brother. For accidentally spilling coffee on him. My wife took his side before I even finished explaining what happened. And now I'm sitting in a house I'm not sure I can afford anymore, wondering if my marriage was ever actually a partnership or if I've just been a supporting character in your family's story. I heard her heels click against the hardwood floor as she came into the living room. That's not fair. Fair? Now I did turn around, and whatever she saw in my face made her take a step back. Fair is an interesting word to use right now. What part of today has been fair, Sarah? Walk me through it. Marcus didn't want to fire you. He had to. You don't understand the pressure he's under. The pressure he's under, I repeated. He's been head of operations for 2 days. What pressure could he possibly be under that would justify firing me for an accident? She sat down on the couch, carefully, like she was negotiating a hostage situation. You embarrassed him. In front of junior executives. And you argued with him instead of just apologizing. And I did apologize. Immediately. I offered to pay for his suit, but then you argued. Marcus said you were insubordinate, that you've been showing attitude for weeks. He said, "When?" I leaned forward. "When have I been showing attitude? Give me one example. One specific, concrete example of me being insubordinate or difficult or anything other than the person who makes sure things actually work in that company." Sarah looked away. He knows more about this than I do. He sees things at work that I don't see. He's been there 4 years, Sarah. I've been there 8. I built the systems he takes credit for. I wrote the code he presents in meetings. I solve the problems he doesn't even understand are problems. And this morning, he fired me because I made him look bad in front of people, and you're defending him. He's my brother. There it was, the thing we'd been dancing around for 4 years, the hierarchy that had always been there but never stated so baldly. He's my brother. As if that explained everything. As if blood was an argument, a justification, a trump card that made everything else irrelevant. "And I'm your husband," I said quietly. "I know that," but her voice wavered, just slightly. "I know, but David, you have to understand, Marcus has been there for me my whole life. When Dad died, when I was struggling in college, when I needed help getting my business started, he's always been there, and I know he can be difficult sometimes. I know he's not perfect, but he's family. What am I?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy and dangerous. "You know your family," Sarah said, but she couldn't quite meet my eyes. "But it's different. You chose to be part of this family. Marcus and I, we didn't have a choice. We've been through things together that you weren't there for. We have history." "We have history," I said. 4 years of marriage, 8 years before that of dating, of building a life together. Or was I the only one building? That's not fair. She was getting angry now, which meant I was getting too close to something true. "I've supported you. I've been there for you." "Have you?" I stood up, suddenly unable to sit still. "Name one time in the last 4 years when you took my side against Marcus. One time when you stood up for me instead of making excuses for him." She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "That's what I thought," I said. "David, I don't want to fight. I came home to talk about this rationally. Marcus feels terrible about what happened. He said if you apologize properly, if you show that you understand why he had to make that decision, he might be willing to consider bringing you back in a different role. Something less senior, obviously, but a different role." I almost laughed. "Something less senior, so I can spend the next few years reporting to your brother, watching him take credit for my work, knowing that one wrong move and I'm out again. That's what you want from me?" "I want you to have a job," Sarah said, and now there was steel in her voice. "I want us to be able to pay our mortgage. I want you to stop being so proud that you can't see when someone is offering you a lifeline. That's not a lifeline. That's a leash. It's a job, David. It's money. It's security. Or would you rather we lose the house? Would you rather I have to call my mother and tell her that we need help because you were too stubborn to apologize to your boss? Your boss, not her brother, not the person who'd been wrong. Your boss. As if the power differential justified everything." I looked at my wife, really looked at her, and saw a stranger. Or maybe I'd always been looking at a stranger and just hadn't wanted to admit it. She was beautiful. Even now. Even angry. Beautiful and successful and from a family with connections and money and the kind of confidence that came from never really having to worry about anything. And I'd spent 4 years trying to be worthy of her, trying to prove that I belonged in her world, trying to ignore the small ways she made me feel like I was always just slightly beneath her. "I'm not apologizing to Marcus," I said. "Then what are you going to do?" She stood up now too, and we faced each other across the living room like boxers in a ring. "You can't just not work. You can't just decide you're too good to. I have options. What options? David, you've been at the same company for 8 years. You don't have a network. You don't have connections. You're good at what you do, but good isn't enough anymore. You need people who will advocate for you, who will open doors. And I'm telling you, Marcus is willing to be that person if you just— I don't want Marcus's help. Then you're a fool. Her eyes were bright now, either with tears or rage. I couldn't tell. You're throwing away everything because of your pride, because you can't stand the idea of admitting that maybe, just maybe, you were wrong. I wasn't wrong. I spilled coffee. That's it. That's the extent of my wrongdoing. And then you argued. And then you hung up on me. And now you're sitting here in the dark, being dramatic instead of practical. She grabbed her purse from where she dropped it on the couch. I'm going to stay at my mother's tonight. Give you some space to think about what you want, what you really want. Because right now, you're not the person I married. You're right, I said. I'm not. The person you married would have apologized, would have begged Marcus for his job back, would have spent the rest of his career being grateful for the privilege of being humiliated. The person I married was kind. Her voice broke on the last word. He was generous. He didn't keep score. He didn't hold grudges. The person you married was a doormat, I said, and you liked it that way. She stared at me for a long moment, and I watched something change in her expression. Not anger anymore. Something colder. Something final. Figure out what you're going to do, she said quietly. Because I'm not going to subsidize your pride. If you don't have a job by the end of the month, I'm filing for separation. Then she was gone. Her footsteps sharp against the hardwood, the front door closing with a finality that echoed through the empty house. I stood there in the living room, listening to her car start, listening to her drive away, and I felt nothing. Not sadness, not regret, not even anger. Just a vast, peaceful emptiness, like a landscape after a storm has passed through and destroyed everything that wasn't strong enough to stand. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Sarah told me, you're being difficult. This is your last chance. Monday morning, 8 a.m. My office. Come prepared to apologize, and we'll discuss terms for your return. Don't make me regret giving you this opportunity. I read it 3 times. Then I deleted it. Another text, this time from a number I didn't recognize. This is Jennifer from accounting. I probably shouldn't be texting you, but I thought you should know Marcus has been calling everyone who ever worked with you on the Cascade project. He's trying to piece together how the system works. He seems worried. Really worried. I smiled. Actually smiled. Alone in my empty house. Thanks for letting me know. I typed back. Don't worry. Everything's going to work out. Saturday morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls. 3 from Sarah, 6 from Marcus, 5 from my mother-in-law, 2 from numbers I didn't recognize, and 1 from the company's CEO, which was interesting because I'd never spoken to the CEO directly in 8 years. Not once. I was apparently too junior, too unimportant. But now that Marcus needed something, suddenly I was worth a phone call from the top. I didn't listen to any of the voicemails. Instead, I made coffee, good coffee, from the expensive beans Sarah always said were a waste of money, and sat down at my laptop to do something I should have done years ago. I documented everything. Every project I'd completed, every system I'd built, every problem I'd solved, every time Marcus had presented my work as his own, every meeting where he'd used terminology he didn't understand, every email chain where I could see him learning the language of competence without actually developing the competence itself. 8 years of receipts. It took me 6 hours. 6 hours of pulling files, organizing emails, creating a timeline that showed exactly who had done what. It wasn't revenge, not exactly. It was evidence. It was the truth, arranged in a way that couldn't be dismissed or reframed or spun. When I finished, I had a document that was 73 pages long. I saved it in 3 places, including a cloud service that couldn't be accessed by anyone from the company. Then I sent a copy to Richard Chen with a simple message. Thought you might want to see this before Monday. His response came back in under 5 minutes. This is even better than I hoped. Send it to me again Monday morning, right before the board meeting. I want it fresh in everyone's mind. My phone rang. Marcus, calling for the 7th time. I let it go to voicemail. Then I listened to the voicemail, curious about how desperate he'd gotten. David, this is ridiculous. His voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the edge underneath. You need to call me back. We have a board meeting Monday, and I need access to the Cascade Project files. This is bigger than whatever personal issue you think we have. This is about the company. This is about all of our jobs. So stop being petty and call me back. Petty. That was his word for it. Not consequences or accountability. Petty. The next voicemail was from the CEO. Mr. Morrison, this is Gerald Chen. No relation to Richard, I assumed. Though in a city this size, you never knew. I understand there was an incident yesterday. I'd like to discuss bringing you back to the company under terms that I think you'll find very favorable. Please call me at your earliest convenience. Terms I'd find favorable. That was interesting. That meant Marcus had gone to the CEO, had explained that he'd fired someone essential, and the CEO had realized they had a problem big enough that he was willing to personally intervene. I didn't call him back either. Instead, I spent Saturday afternoon doing something I hadn't done in years. I went for a walk, just walked through the neighborhood, looking at houses I passed every day without seeing, noticing trees and gardens and the way afternoon light hit brick walls. I walked past the park where Sarah and I used to go on Sunday mornings, back when we'd first moved into the neighborhood, back when we'd talk about the future we were building, the life we wanted. I realized I couldn't remember the last time we'd gone to that park together. Couldn't remember the last time we'd talked about a future that included both of us, rather than her family's plans and her brother's career and what her mother thought we should do with the house. When had I stopped being part of the we, or had I ever really been part of it at all? Sunday was quieter. Only 3 phone calls from Marcus, 2 from Sarah. None from the CEO, which suggested he'd been told to back off, that Marcus had convinced him it would all work out. It wouldn't work out. I knew that now with absolute certainty. I spent Sunday morning in a coffee shop, a real one, not the break room of a company that didn't value me working on a different kind of document. Not a record of Marcus's incompetence, but a record of my own competence. A portfolio. A resume that actually reflected what I'd accomplished, instead of the modest, self-deprecating version I'd been carrying around for years. 8 years of underselling myself. 8 years of making other people comfortable with my abilities instead of actually claiming them. I was done with that. At 2 o'clock, Richard Chen called. How are you holding up? He asked, and there was genuine concern in his voice, which surprised me. Better than I expected, I said truthfully. Good, because I need to prepare you for tomorrow. It's going to be ugly. Marcus is going to try to blame you for everything, for not leaving proper documentation, for sabotaging the company, for being unprofessional. He's going to paint himself as the victim of a disgruntled employee. Are you ready for that? Yes. And your wife? How is that situation? I looked around the coffee shop, at strangers, living their lives, having their own conversations, dealing with their own crises that had nothing to do with mine. She gave me an ultimatum. Get a job by the end of the month, or she's filing for separation. I'm sorry, Richard said, and he sounded like he meant it. I'm not. And I realized, as I said it, that it was true. I'm not sorry. I'm relieved. Because at least now I know where I stand. At least now I don't have to pretend that we're partners when I'm really just an accessory to her family. That's a healthy attitude, Richard said. Hold on to that tomorrow. Because when Marcus falls apart, when the board sees what he really is, there's going to be collateral damage. People are going to be angry. Some of them will be angry at you. Let them be angry, I said. I'm done protecting people who never protected me. Good man. I could hear the smile in his voice. 9 a.m. tomorrow. Conference room on the executive floor. Don't be late. I won't be late, I promised. I've been waiting for this for 4 years. Sunday night. I couldn't sleep. Not from anxiety, from anticipation. From the electric thrill of knowing that tomorrow everything would change. Tomorrow, Marcus would stand in front of the board and try to explain systems he'd never understood. Tomorrow, the performance would end. Tomorrow, the truth would have its moment. I lay in bed in my empty house, listening to the silence that used to be filled with Sarah's breathing, and I thought about Richard's question. What did I want? I wanted recognition. I wanted respect. I wanted to stop apologizing for being good at what I did. I wanted to watch Marcus face consequences. I wanted to start over in a world where competence mattered more than connections. I wanted to stop being invisible. At midnight, my phone buzzed one last time. Marcus, sending a text instead of calling. Last chance. 7 a.m. tomorrow, before the meeting. We can fix this. Don't make this worse than it needs to be. I thought about responding. Thought about saying all the things I'd been holding back for 4 years, but in the end, I just typed 2 words. See you tomorrow. Then I set my alarm for 6 a.m., closed my eyes, and finally, mercifully, slept. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that makes everything feel significant, like the universe had decided to pay attention. The sky was that particular shade of blue that only comes after rain, washed clean and infinite, and the light slanting through my bedroom window had the quality of a beginning or an ending. Sometimes those look the same until you're standing on the other side of them. I was awake before my alarm, had been awake since 5:30, lying in bed and watching the darkness gradually separate into shapes: the dresser, the chair where Sarah used to drape her clothes, the empty space on her side of the bed that felt larger than it physically was. Strange how absence takes up more room than presence sometimes. I showered, shaved, and put on my best suit. Not because I was trying to impress anyone, but because armor comes in different forms, and today I needed the kind that made me feel like I knew who I was. The suit was charcoal gray, tailored well enough that I'd always felt slightly uncomfortable in it, like I was playing dress-up in someone else's life. But today it fit differently. Today it felt like mine. 6:45. I made coffee, drank it, standing at the kitchen counter, and thought about the last time I'd done this, made coffee in this kitchen, in this house. As someone who had a job, and a wife, and a future that looked like it was supposed to look, that had been Friday morning. 48 hours ago. A lifetime ago. My phone buzzed. Marcus, where are you? We need to talk before the meeting. I didn't respond. Let him wonder. Let him panic. Let him feel, for once in his privileged life, what it was like to need something from someone who had no reason to give it to him. 7:15. I got in my car and drove to the office, the place that had been my office until Friday, the place that would never be my office again, regardless of how this day went. You can't unfeel certain things. You can't unknow what you've learned about how little you matter to people you thought valued you. The parking garage was nearly empty at this hour. I pulled into a spot on the 3rd level, not my old assigned spot, but a visitor space, because that's what I was now, a visitor, a ghost returning to haunt the place where he used to exist. The lobby was quiet, just the security guard and the early morning cleaning crew. The guard looked up as I approached, recognition flickering across his face, followed by confusion. Fired employees don't usually come back. Fired employees definitely don't come back 3 days later looking calm and well-dressed, and like they have every right to be there. Mr. Morrison, he said carefully, I'm not sure you're authorized to. I have a meeting with the board. I showed him my phone, where Richard Chen's email invitation glowed with official authority. Conference Room A, 9 a.m. The guard studied the email, then studied me, probably trying to reconcile what he'd seen Friday. The humiliation, the box of belongings, the escort out with what he was seeing now. Finally, he nodded and waved me through. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt longer than usual, or maybe time was just moving differently today, stretching out to make room for everything that was about to happen. When the doors opened, I stepped out into the hallway where, 3 days ago, I'd spilled coffee on my brother-in-law and watched my carefully constructed life begin to collapse. Marcus was waiting outside Conference Room A. He looked terrible. That was my first thought. Not satisfaction exactly, but a kind of clinical observation. He looked like he hadn't slept, his expensive suit slightly rumpled, his tie not quite straight, his hair less perfectly styled than usual. There were shadows under his eyes that makeup or confidence couldn't quite hide. He saw me and something like relief crossed his face, quickly replaced by anger, then desperation, then back to anger, an emotional slot machine landing on the expression he thought would work best. "Finally," he said, striding toward me. "Do you have any idea how many times I've tried to reach you? This is completely unprofessional. You can't just what?" I kept my voice level, almost friendly. "I don't work here anymore, Marcus. You fired me. Remember? Friday morning, coffee stain, gross negligence, insubordination." He flinched. Actually flinched. That was heat of the moment. I was upset about my suit. But we can fix this. I talked to the CEO, and he agrees that we acted hastily. We're prepared to bring you back. Full salary restoration. Even a small raise. But I need the Cascade project files. I need them now, before the meeting. Why? The question seemed to confuse him. Why? Because I'm presenting the project to the board. Because it's the centerpiece of the investor pitch. Because the entire future of this company depends on... No, I interrupted. I mean, why do you need the files? You're the head of operations. You've been taking credit for the Cascade project for 2 years. Surely you understand how it works. Surely you can present it without needing to reference my documentation. I watched his face cycle through expressions again: confusion, understanding, anger, and finally, something that might have been fear. "David, don't do this. Whatever point you're trying to make, this isn't the time. There are board members in there. There's an investor ready to put in $42 million. This is bigger than your ego." "My ego," I repeated softly. "That's interesting. Tell me, Marcus, in the past 2 years, how many meetings have you presented the Cascade project? 5? 6? I don't see how that's... And in those meetings, how many times did you mention that I built it? That I designed the integration protocols? That I wrote every line of code?" His jaw tightened. "I mentioned the team. I always mention the team." "The team," I said. "That's a good word. Vague, collective. Doesn't require you to acknowledge specific people. Doesn't require you to share credit with anyone who might threaten your narrative about your own competence. You're being ridiculous. This is how business works. Managers present their team's work. That's what management is." "Management," I said, "is supposed to understand what their team does. Management is supposed to be able to answer questions about the work they're presenting. Management is not supposed to fire the only person who actually knows how anything works, and then panic when they realize they're about to be exposed." Marcus stepped closer, his voice dropping to something that was supposed to sound threatening but came out desperate instead. "Listen to me very carefully. If you sabotage this meeting, if you make me look bad in front of the board, I will make sure you never work in this industry again. I have connections. I have influence. I will destroy your reputation so thoroughly that..." "Good morning, gentlemen." We both turned. Richard Chen was standing in the doorway of Conference Room A, immaculate, in a navy suit that probably cost more than Marcus's coffee-stained brioni, holding a tablet and wearing an expression of polite interest that didn't reach his eyes. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important," Richard continued, though his tone suggested he knew exactly what he was interrupting and was enjoying it immensely. "Marcus, the board is ready for you. David, if you could wait out here for a few minutes, I may need you to clarify some technical details during the presentation." Marcus's face went pale. "David doesn't work here anymore. He was terminated on Friday for..." "I'm aware of the circumstances of his termination," Richard said smoothly. "I'm also aware that he's the principal architect of the systems you're about to present. The board feels it would be prudent to have him available for questions, unless you feel confident handling all technical inquiries yourself." The silence that followed was exquisite. "Of course I can handle them," Marcus said finally, but his voice had lost its certainty. "But having David here would be helpful for specific technical details, minor details." "Wonderful," Richard smiled. "Shall we begin?" Conference Room A was designed to intimidate. floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a table that could seat 20, chairs that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and a presentation screen that took up most of one wall. The board members were already seated, 7 of them, ranging from the CEO Gerald Chen to board members I recognized only from company emails and quarterly meetings. They all looked at me as I entered behind Marcus and Richard, some with curiosity, some with confusion, 1 or 2 with what might have been sympathy. They'd heard about Friday. Of course, they'd heard. In a company this size, scandals traveled faster than facts. "Thank you all for being here," Gerald began, standing at the head of the table. "As you know, we're here to finalize the investment agreement with Mr. Chen's firm. We've reviewed the financial projections, the market analysis, and the strategic vision. The final component is the operational overview, specifically focusing on the Cascade project, which represents our primary value proposition going forward. Marcus, the floor is yours." Marcus stood, smoothed his tie, and moved to the presentation screen. He clicked the remote, and the first slide appeared a title card with the Cascade project logo I'd designed 2 years ago, back when I'd still believed that good work would be recognized, that building something excellent was its own reward. "Good morning," Marcus said, and his voice was confident, practiced. He'd done this before, I realized. He'd stood in rooms like this and performed competence so many times that the performance had become automatic. "I'm excited to present the Cascade project, which has been the cornerstone of our operational evolution over the past 2 years. He clicked to the next slide, an overview diagram showing the system architecture. My architecture. My diagram. My color-coding system that made logical sense if you understood the underlying structure but looked like abstract art if you didn't. As you can see, Marcus continued, the system integrates multiple data streams into a unified processing framework, allowing for real-time analytics and responsive scaling. Buzzwords. He was leading with buzzwords. I watched the board members nod, making notes, looking appropriately impressed by language that sounded technical but said nothing. "The key innovation," Marcus said, clicking to another slide, "is the modular integration protocol, which allows us to add new data sources without disrupting existing workflows." One of the board members, a woman named Patricia who had a PhD in computer science and hadn't gotten where she was by accepting vague explanations, raised her hand. "Can you explain how the integration protocol handles data type conflicts?" she asked. "Specifically, when you're pulling from sources with incompatible schemas?" Marcus's smile didn't falter, but I saw his hand tighten on the remote. "That's an excellent question. The protocol uses a reconciliation layer that normalizes the incoming data streams." "Yes," Patricia said patiently. "But how does it normalize them? What's the algorithm? Is it rule-based, or does it use machine learning?" "It's both," Marcus said. "It's a hybrid approach that leverages the strengths of both methodologies." He clicked to the next slide, trying to move past the question, but Patricia wasn't done. "I'd like to understand the technical implementation," she said. "Because if it's truly a hybrid approach, that's quite sophisticated. That's potentially publishable work. Who designed it?" The room went very quiet. Marcus's smile was frozen now, a mask that was starting to crack around the edges. It was a team effort. Multiple people contributed to. David Morrison designed it. Everyone turned. Richard Chen had spoken, his voice calm and factual, like he was noting the weather or the time of day. "I'm sorry?" Gerald said. "David Morrison," Richard repeated, nodding toward where I sat at the far end of the table. "He's the principal architect of the Cascade project. He designed the integration protocol, wrote the core algorithms, and developed the entire system architecture. It's all documented in the project files, which, I understand, Marcus no longer has access to due to an unfortunate personnel decision made last Friday." The silence that followed was the kind that has weight, that presses down on everything and makes the air feel thick. Marcus's face had gone from pale to red. Yes, David contributed significantly, but the overall vision, the strategic direction. "Can you explain how the reconciliation layer works?" Patricia asked again. And now there was something sharp in her voice, something that suggested she already knew the answer and was testing whether Marcus did. As I said, it's a hybrid approach that, specifically, Patricia interrupted, not in generalities. Tell me how it handles a situation where you have 3 different data sources, each using different timestamp formats, and you need to maintain temporal consistency across all 3 streams while also accounting for network latency variations. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. The system has built-in protocols that handle those edge cases automatically, he said. What protocols? The temporal synchronization protocols. And those protocols are implemented how? I watched Marcus realize, in real time, that he'd been trapped, that every answer he gave would lead to another question he couldn't answer, that the performance he'd relied on for 4 years was finally, catastrophically, failing him. Perhaps, Richard said gently, David could explain. Since he built the system, every eye in the room turned to me. I stood up slowly, aware that this was the moment, that everything I'd been planning for the past 3 days was culminating here, in this room, with these people watching. The reconciliation layer, I said, and my voice was steady, clear, uses a priority-based buffering system with predictive timestamp interpolation. Each data source is assigned a latency profile based on historical performance metrics, and the system maintains a sliding window buffer that allows for temporal reordering of events before they're committed to the main processing stream. Patricia's eyebrows rose. That's elegant. And the handling of schema conflicts? Dynamic mapping tables that are generated at connection time and updated whenever a source schema changes. The system monitors for structural changes and automatically generates new mappings, with human oversight required only for ambiguous cases. And this is all your design? Yes. How long have you been working on it? 3 years. 2 years of active development. 1 year of refinement and optimization. Patricia made a note, then looked at Marcus. And you were going to present this system without being able to explain how it actually works? Marcus's hands were shaking. I could see them trembling at his sides, see the sweat on his forehead despite the air conditioning. I understand the strategic vision. The technical details are. The technical details are everything, Patricia said. The strategic vision without technical implementation is just wishful thinking. Gerald cleared his throat. Marcus, I think we need to have a conversation about. This is sabotage, Marcus said suddenly, loudly, pointing at me. He's sabotaging me. He deliberately withheld information, deliberately made himself indispensable, so that when I had to fire him for legitimate performance issues, he could come back and make me look incompetent. This is manipulation. This is... Stop. Richard's voice cut through Marcus's rising panic like a blade. Stop talking, Richard continued, before you make this worse. He pulled out his tablet, tapped it a few times, and the presentation screen changed. Instead of Marcus's slides, it now showed a document. My document. 73 pages of receipts, of emails and project files and meeting notes and every piece of evidence I'd compiled over the weekend. This, Richard said, is a complete record of the Cascade project's development. David sent it to me last night. It includes every email exchange, every design decision, every technical specification. It shows, quite clearly, who built what and when. It also shows a pattern of credit attribution that is, let's say, concerning. He scrolled through the document, highlighting specific passages. Here's an email from 2 years ago, where Marcus presents David's work in a board meeting without attribution. Here's another from 18 months ago, where he uses David's technical specifications in a client pitch. And here, this is interesting, here's a message from last Friday where he tells multiple staff members that David deliberately withheld information to make himself indispensable. Marcus had gone beyond pale now. He looked gray, like someone had drained all the color out of him. The reality, Richard continued, is that David Morrison has been carrying this company's technical operations for years. He's been doing the work while others took credit. And when he accidentally spilled coffee, he was fired not for incompetence, but for making someone with a newly inflated ego feel small. He looked at Marcus directly now. "You've been head of operations for less than a week. In that time, you've fired your most valuable employee, alienated your technical staff, and demonstrated that you fundamentally don't understand the systems you're responsible for. And you're trying to present this as sabotage?" The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. "I have a question," said another board member, an older man named Robert who'd been silent until now. "If we approve this investment and David doesn't return to the company, can we successfully implement the Cascade Project expansion?" Richard looked at me. "David?" "No," I said simply. "The documentation is comprehensive, but implementation requires understanding the underlying architecture. Training someone else would take 6 months minimum, possibly longer, and that's assuming you find someone with the right skill set. And if you do return?" I looked at Marcus, who was staring at the table, his hands still trembling. Then I looked at Gerald, at Patricia, at the board members who were supposed to lead this company. "I'm not interested in returning under the current operational structure," I said. Gerald leaned forward. What would it take? What would need to change? And there it was, the question I'd been waiting for. The moment where power shifted, where the person who'd been invisible became essential, where the person who'd been fired got to dictate terms. I took a breath. "Everything," I said. The word hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Everything. I could see them processing it, these board members who were used to negotiations and leverage and the careful dance of corporate politics. But this wasn't a negotiation. Not really. This was something else, a reckoning maybe, or a correction, a rebalancing of scales that had been tilted for so long that everyone had forgotten what level looked like. Gerald recovered first. "I'm not sure I understand what you mean by everything." I said, and I was surprised by how calm my voice sounded, how steady. "That if you want me to come back, if you want the Cascade Project to succeed, if you want this investment to actually create value, instead of just changing the names on the org chart, then the entire operational structure needs to change. Not tweaks, not adjustments, fundamental restructuring." Patricia was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "That's a significant demand." "It's a significant problem," I replied. "This company has been rewarding performance instead of competence for years. People who can present well get promoted. People who can take credit gracefully move up. And people who actually do the work, who solve problems, who build systems, who make things function, they stay invisible until they're inconvenient. Then they get fired for spilling coffee." I saw a few board members glance at Marcus, who was still staring at the table like he could disappear into it through sheer force of will. "You're talking about more than just your position," Robert said. "You're talking about a cultural shift." "I'm talking about survival," I said. "Right now, you're about to accept a $42 million investment based on technology that exactly one person in this company fully understands. That person was fired 3 days ago. That's not a sustainable business model. That's a catastrophe waiting to happen." Richard leaned back in his chair, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He was enjoying this, I could tell. This was why he'd set everything in motion, not just to remove Marcus, but to create a moment where the fundamental problems with the company's culture became impossible to ignore. "What specifically are you proposing?" Gerald asked. And I could hear the calculation in his voice. He was CEO. This was his company, his leadership, his responsibility. Acknowledging that the structure was broken meant acknowledging that he'd let it break. I pulled out my own tablet I'd prepared for this moment, had spent Sunday night drafting a proposal because I knew that having leverage was only valuable if you knew what to do with it. "First," I said, pulling up my document, "complete operational restructuring. The head of operations position, as currently constituted, needs to be eliminated. Replace it with a chief technology officer role that reports directly to the CEO and has actual authority over technical development and implementation." Gerald nodded slowly. "And you'd want that position?" "I'd be willing to accept it with the understanding that I'd have full authority to hire, fire, and restructure my department without interference." That's a lot of power to hand to someone who was terminated 3 days ago. One of the other board members said a man named Thomas, who I knew from company emails, was Marcus's golf buddy. You're right, I said, meeting his eyes. It's also a lot of power to hand to someone who's been single-handedly keeping your technical infrastructure functional for 3 years while being systematically undervalued. You can gamble on finding someone else who understands the systems as well as I do, who can implement the expansion plan, who can prevent the entire Cascade project from becoming a very expensive paperweight. Or you can acknowledge that sometimes the person with the leverage earned it. Thomas looked like he wanted to argue, but Patricia spoke first. What else? Second, I continued, equity. Not stock options, actual equity. 5% of the company, vested immediately, with provisions that it can't be diluted without my explicit consent. Gerald's eyebrows rose. 5% is worth approximately $2 million at current valuation, I said. Or if the Cascade project expansion succeeds the way your projections suggest, approximately $8 million in 3 years. That seems fair compensation for 8 years of building value that other people took credit for. That's not how equity distribution works in established companies, Thomas said. We have compensation structures, formulas. You also have a $42 million investment that's about to evaporate if you can't demonstrate that you have the technical competence to execute on your promises, I said. I'm not interested in what's normal. I'm interested in what's fair. Richard cleared his throat. If I may interject, David's equity demand is actually quite reasonable by industry standards for someone with his level of technical contribution. In fact, I'd argue it's conservative. Most founders retain more equity for less substantial technological innovations. He's not a founder, Thomas said. No, Richard agreed. He's better. Founders start with an idea. David took someone else's mediocre company and built the actual value proposition that makes it worth investing in. That's harder. The silence that followed was broken by Marcus. This is insane. His voice was quiet, strained, like something had broken in his throat. You're letting him blackmail you. You're rewarding him for being vindictive and petty. And, Marcus, Gerald said, not unkindly, but with finality, I think you should stop talking. But he's... Stop talking. Marcus stopped. He looked around the room, at faces that had been friendly to him last week, that had congratulated him on his promotion, that had made him feel like he'd finally arrived. Now those same faces were looking at him with expressions ranging from pity to contempt to simple disinterest. The kind of disinterest that comes when someone stops being useful, stops being relevant, stops mattering. I'd seen that look before, seen it on faces looking at other people. I'd never imagined how it would feel to be on the other side of it, to be the one watching someone else receive the indifference I'd felt for years. It didn't feel as good as I'd thought it would. Third, I said, pulling their attention back to me, complete autonomy over the Cascade project expansion. No oversight from operations. No check-ins with people who don't understand the technology. I report to Gerald and to the board, but the actual implementation decisions are mine. You hired me, or you're about to hire me, because I know how to build these systems. Let me build them. That's reasonable, Patricia said, assuming your track record supports that level of trust. It does, Richard said, pulling up another document on the main screen. I had my team do a comprehensive analysis of every major technical project this company has completed in the last 5 years. David was the primary contributor on 11 of them, lead architect on 8. The 3 he wasn't involved in all went significantly over budget and under-delivered on functionality. The correlation is unmistakable. He let that sit for a moment, then continued. You have 2 choices. You can negotiate with David, acknowledge his value, and build a company that actually rewards competence. Or you can try to replace him, spend 6 months training someone new, probably lose the investment opportunity, and hope that whoever you hire is half as good. Or, Thomas said, we could sue him for withholding company property, the Cascade project files, the documentation, those belong to the company. Actually, I said calmly, they don't. Check my employment contract, Section 12, Subsection 4. I retained intellectual property rights for any systems I developed independently, defined as Systems created outside of direct company assignment and using my own resources. The Cascade project started as my personal project. I brought it to the company and agreed to let them use it, but I retained ownership of the core architecture. I could see Gerald doing the mental calculation how much it would cost to fight me in court, how long it would take, how much that would delay the investment, how much credibility the company would lose if it became public that they were suing the person who'd actually built their primary value proposition. "You planned this," he said, and there was something like admiration in his voice. "You knew this moment might come." "No," I said honestly. "I hoped it wouldn't. I hoped that good work would be recognized, that being excellent at what I do would be enough. But I've learned that hope isn't a strategy. Documentation is. Legal protection is. Being willing to walk away is." Another silence. Outside the window, I could see the city going about its business, cars moving through streets, people walking into buildings, the ordinary machinery of commerce and ambition and survival grinding forward, indifferent to the small drama playing out in this conference room. "What else?" Gerald asked finally. "That's it," I said. "CTO role with full authority, 5% equity, autonomy over the Cascade project. Those are my terms. And if we don't agree?" I looked at Richard, who gave me an almost imperceptible nod. "Then I walk away," I said. "I take my intellectual property with me. I start my own company, or I consult, or I take one of the dozen job offers I've been ignoring for the past 2 years because I was loyal to this company." And you try to figure out how to deliver on promises you can't keep to an investor who's already told you that his investment is contingent on having competent technical leadership. Which means, Richard added, that if David walks, the investment doesn't happen, which means your expansion plans don't happen, which means your stock price takes a hit when investors realize you've lost your primary technical asset, which means some of you might start facing uncomfortable questions from shareholders about how this situation was allowed to develop in the first place. He wasn't threatening them? Not exactly. He was just laying out consequences. Dominoes in a line, waiting to fall. Gerald looked at the other board members. Some kind of silent communication passed between them. Years of working together, of reading each other's signals, of knowing when to fight and when to fold. "We'll need to discuss this privately," Gerald said. "Can you give us the room?" "Of course," Richard said, standing. "David, why don't we wait outside?" Marcus started to stand as well, but Gerald shook his head. "Not you, Marcus. You're part of what we need to discuss." The color drained from Marcus's face again. He looked at me, and for just a moment, I saw something in his eyes that might have been understanding, or maybe just recognition that this was it, that the performance was over, that consequences were no longer theoretical. I followed Richard out into the hallway. The hallway felt cooler than the conference room, or maybe that was just the adrenaline leaving my system. Now that the presentation was over, now that I'd said everything I'd planned to say, I felt oddly empty, not satisfied, not triumphant, just tired in a way that went deeper than physical exhaustion. "You did well in there," Richard said, checking his phone. "Better than I expected, actually. Most people fumble when they finally get leverage. They either underask or overask. You asked for exactly what you're worth." "How long have you been planning this?" I asked. He smiled. "Since the moment I started doing due diligence on this company and realized that its primary asset was being systematically exploited. I've seen it before companies where the value creation and the value capture are completely disconnected, where the people doing the actual work are invisible and the people taking credit are untouchable. It offends me, honestly. It's inefficient." "That's all this is to you? Efficiency?" "No," Richard said, and his voice was suddenly serious. "It's justice, which is just another word for correct resource allocation. People should get what they earn. Companies should be run by people who understand what the company does. That's not idealism. That's just basic capitalism. Anything else is corruption." My phone buzzed. "Sarah. Marcus just called me. He's crying. He says you destroyed him. He says this is all your fault." I stared at the message, feeling that empty space inside me grow larger. "He fired me for spilling coffee," I typed back. "I didn't destroy him." I just stopped protecting him from the consequences of his own incompetence. The three dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, he's family. Family doesn't do this to each other. Apparently, family fires each other and expects forgiveness, I wrote. But family doesn't defend each other when they've been wronged. You made your choice about what family means. I'm making mine. I muted the conversation before she could respond. Your wife? Richard asked. Ex-wife, I said. She just doesn't know it yet. He nodded like that. Made perfect sense. For what it's worth, you're making the right choice. I've seen too many talented people destroy themselves trying to maintain relationships with people who only value them for what they provide. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let people face reality without you there to cushion the fall. Doesn't feel kind, I said. No, Richard agreed. Justice rarely does. Not in the moment. But check back in 5 years. See if you regret it then. The conference room door opened. Patricia stepped out, closing it behind her. David, she said, can I speak with you for a moment? Privately? Richard glanced at me, then at Patricia, then nodded and walked down the hallway to give us space. Patricia was a tall woman, early 50s, with the kind of presence that suggested she'd spent a career breaking through barriers that shouldn't have existed in the first place. She'd been on the board for 3 years, and I'd always respected her in the abstract way you respect people you never actually interact with. I wanted to apologize, she said. That surprised me. For what? For not noticing sooner, for not asking questions. I review the technical reports. I see the project summaries, but I don't dig deep enough into who's actually doing what. And that's my job. That's why I'm on this board, to provide technical oversight, to make sure we're building sustainable systems. And I failed. She looked angry, but the anger was directed inward. I should have seen what Marcus was doing. I should have seen that the reports were full of buzzwords and empty of substance. I should have questioned why someone with his background was suddenly leading complex technical projects, but I didn't. I let it slide because it was easier, because confrontation is uncomfortable, because I assumed someone else was paying attention. You couldn't have known, I said. I could have, she corrected. That's the problem. I had all the information I needed. I just didn't look closely enough. And you paid the price for that negligence. She pulled out her phone, opened an email, and showed it to me. It was from her to Gerald, time-stamped Saturday afternoon. Gerald, I've been reviewing the technical documentation we have on file for the Cascade project. It's incomplete to the point of being useless. Either we have a serious documentation problem, or we have a serious leadership problem. Either way, we need to address it before Monday's meeting. I'm recommending we bring David Morrison in as a consultant, at minimum, possibly more, depending on what we uncover. Patricia, you already knew, I said. I suspected, she corrected. The coffee incident gave me an excuse to dig deeper, and once I started digging, the whole house of cards became obvious. She put her phone away. The board is going to accept your terms. All of them. We'd be fools not to. But I wanted you to know that even if Richard Chen hadn't forced this moment, I was already moving in that direction. Slowly, possibly too slowly, but moving. Why are you telling me this? Because when you become CTO, and you will, you're going to inherit a mess. Not just technical debt, but cultural debt. People who've been promoted beyond their competence. People who've been covering for each other. People who are going to resist changes that threaten their comfortable incompetence. She paused. You're going to need allies. I'm offering to be one. Not because I feel guilty, though I do, but because I think you're exactly what this company needs. Someone who values substance over performance. Someone who's willing to make people uncomfortable if it means building something real. I studied her face, looking for the angle, the ulterior motive. But all I saw was someone who was tired of watching mediocrity get rewarded. I appreciate that, I said. Don't appreciate it yet, Patricia said with a slight smile. Wait until you see how much work there is to do. Wait until you realize how many Marcuses are scattered throughout this organization, protected by their own networks of people who benefit from the current system. This isn't going to be easy. I never thought it would be. Good, she said. Then you're starting with realistic expectations. That's more than most people have. The conference room door opened again. Gerald emerged, looking older than he had an hour ago, the weight of uncomfortable decisions visible in the set of his shoulders. David, he said, can you come back in? The board members were still seated, but the energy in the room had changed. The tension was gone, replaced by something heavier, resignation, maybe, or acceptance. The kind of feeling that settles over a room after a difficult decision has been made and everyone is committed to living with it. Marcus was gone. His chair was empty, pushed back from the table at an awkward angle, like he'd left in a hurry or been asked to leave. Probably both. We've discussed your terms, Gerald said without preamble. We're prepared to accept them with a few minor modifications. I'm listening, I said. The CTO role is yours, effective immediately, with full authority over technical operations as you specified. Salary will be $400,000 annually, plus bonus structure tied to project delivery and company performance. The equity, he paused, glanced at the other board members. We're prepared to offer 4% immediately vested, with the option to earn an additional 2% over the next 2 years based on successful Cascade project implementation. It was less than I'd asked for, but not substantially less. And the pathway to the full 5% was tied to performance I knew I could deliver. Acceptable, I said. Good. Gerald pulled out a folder that had apparently been prepared during their deliberation. We'll have formal contracts drawn up by end of week, but this is a letter of intent that binds both parties to the general terms. You'll start next Monday. We're giving you a week to handle personal affairs, to transition, to prepare. You'll report directly to me, and you'll have full hiring and firing authority within your division, subject to standard HR protocols. He slid the folder across the table to me. I'm not going to pretend this is how I wanted this to go. But Patricia is right. We've been ignoring problems that should have been addressed years ago. You've given us an opportunity to fix those problems. Don't make me regret it. I won't, I said, opening the folder and scanning the letter. Everything he'd said was there, clearly spelled out, legally binding. I signed it. What happened to Marcus? I asked. Gerald's expression hardened. Marcus is no longer with the company. We've accepted his resignation, effective immediately, with a severance package that's generous given the circumstances. He's agreed to sign a non-disclosure agreement and a non-disparagement clause in exchange for that generosity. His resignation, I repeated. He didn't fight it? We gave him a choice. Patricia said, resign quietly with severance and a neutral reference, or be terminated for cause with all the professional consequences that entails. He chose the path that let him save some dignity. I thought about Marcus in that hallway, his trembling hands, his performance finally failing him. Thought about him making that choice, knowing what it meant, knowing that his family would hear about it, that Sarah would hear about it, that his mother would hear about it. Part of me, the part that had spent 4 years trying to be a good brother-in-law, trying to keep peace, trying to believe that family meant something, felt sorry for him. The rest of me remembered Friday morning, remembered his satisfaction when he fired me, remembered Sarah choosing him over me without hesitation. Good, I said. Richard stood, extending his hand to Gerald. I'll have my lawyers finalize the investment agreement this week. Assuming everything goes smoothly and I see no reason why it shouldn't, we'll transfer the initial funds by the end of the month. They shook hands. Business concluded. Deals made. The machine of capitalism grinding forward, indifferent to the human wreckage it left behind. David, Richard said as we walked out together, welcome to the beginning of your actual career. Everything before this was prologue. He was right, I realized. Everything before this, the 8 years of invisible work, the patient suffering, the slow erosion of self-worth, all of it had been building to this moment. Not because it was meant to, not because there was some grand design, but because that's how transformation works. You don't become who you're supposed to be through comfort and recognition. You become it through pressure and challenge, and the moment when you finally decide that you've had enough. You become it when you stop protecting everyone else and start protecting yourself. I left the building at 10:30 in the morning, walking out through the same lobby where, just 90 minutes earlier, I'd arrived as a fired employee with nothing to lose. Now I was leaving as the chief technology officer with 4% of the company, soon to be 6, and the kind of power I'd spent 8 years believing I didn't want. Funny how quickly things change when you stop accepting what people tell you you're worth. The sun was bright, almost aggressive after the controlled climate of the conference room, and I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, just breathing, just existing in the space between one version of my life and the next. People flowed around me, office workers grabbing coffee, delivery drivers double parked and running packages into lobbies, the perpetual motion of a city that never stopped long enough to notice any individual story playing out within it. My phone had been buzzing continuously since I'd left the conference room. I pulled it out and looked at the damage. 14 missed calls from Sarah, 23 text messages, 6 voicemails. I scrolled through the texts without opening them, just reading the preview snippets that appeared on my lock screen. How could you do this to him? He's devastated. He's family, David. Mom is crying. You've destroyed everything. I can't believe you would be so cruel. The messages got progressively more desperate, more accusatory, and somewhere around message 17, they shifted from defending Marcus to attacking me. This is who you really are. Vindictive. Small. You're not the man I married. I almost laughed at that last one. She was right. I wasn't the man she'd married. The man she'd married would have apologized to Marcus, would have begged for his job back, would have spent the next decade being grateful for the privilege of being subordinate to her family. The man she'd married would have chosen peace over dignity, would have swallowed his pride and called it maturity. That man was gone. I'd buried him somewhere between Friday's coffee spill and Monday's board meeting. I called her back. She answered before the first ring finished. David? Oh my God, finally! What did you do? What did you say to them? Marcus just called me from his car and he's completely fired, I said. He's fired. Or he resigned. Technically he resigned, but they gave him the option to resign instead of being terminated for cause, so really he's fired with the courtesy of maintaining some dignity. Silence. Then, you got him fired. No, I said, and my voice was calm, steady, the voice of someone who'd spent days preparing for this exact conversation. I didn't get him fired. I stopped protecting him from the consequences of his own incompetence. That's different. That's semantics. No, Sarah. It's accuracy. Marcus fired me on Friday for spilling coffee. He did that because he could, because he had power, because he wanted to remind me, and probably himself, that he was more important than I was. Then he realized that firing the only person who understood the company's technical infrastructure right before a major board meeting was a catastrophically stupid decision. And when the board asked him to explain the systems he'd been taking credit for, he couldn't, because he never understood them. Because he spent 4 years performing competence instead of developing it. He's my brother. Her voice cracked on the word brother, and I could hear her crying. Actual tears, genuine distress. For him. Always for him. I know he is, I said. I've always known that. That's why you're crying right now. That's why you're calling me to yell at me instead of asking what happened, what the board said, whether I'm okay. Because when it comes down to it, he's your brother, and I'm just your husband. That's not— It is, I interrupted. It's always been that way. I just pretended it wasn't. Because it was easier to pretend. Because acknowledging it would have meant acknowledging that I married into a family that would never actually accept me as family. I could hear her breathing, sharp and shallow, the sound of someone trying to control their emotions and failing. The board offered me a position, I said. Chief Technology Officer, 4% equity, full authority over technical operations. I start next Monday. More silence. Then, you took it. I took it. Even though it means destroying Marcus's career, even though it means destroying our family, you took it. Yes, I said simply. I took it. Because I earned it. Because I've spent 8 years building value that other people took credit for. Because I'm tired of being invisible. And because, Sarah, at some point you have to choose whether you're going to live for other people's comfort or your own dignity. "This isn't dignity," she said, and now her voice was hard, all the tears gone, replaced by something cold and final. "This is revenge. This is cruelty. This is you proving that you're just as petty and vindictive as I always worried you might be. That stopped me. You always worried I might be. You're so resentful, David. You've always been resentful. Of Marcus's success, of my family's money, of the fact that things come easier to some people than others. I've watched you nurse grudges, keep score, remember every little slight. I've watched you build this narrative where you're the victim and everyone else is taking advantage of you." I stood there on the sidewalk, phone pressed to my ear, and felt something inside me go very still. "Do you know what I did yesterday?" I said quietly. "I spent 6 hours documenting 8 years of my work. Every project, every innovation, every solution to problems that Marcus created. And you know what I found? I found that 90% of the company's technical value was created by me. By the person you just called resentful for wanting acknowledgement. By the person you're accusing of pettiness, for refusing to apologize for being good at what I do. You're changing the subject. No, I'm providing context. I'm explaining why your brother lost his job. Not because I'm vindictive, not because I wanted revenge, but because when the board looked at the actual data, when they saw who created what, they realized that promoting Marcus was a mistake, and firing me was a bigger one." "The board," Sarah said with contempt. "You went to the board. You couldn't just have a conversation like an adult. You couldn't just work it out between you. You had to make it official, make it public. Humiliate him in front of everyone." "He fired me in front of everyone," I said. "He made sure there were witnesses. He wanted people to see him exercising his authority. And now he's upset that those same people saw him fail to live up to that authority." "He's family, David. Family. Family. You keep saying that like it means something," I said. "Like it's a shield that protects him from consequences. But it doesn't. Marcus is an adult who made adult decisions, and now he's facing adult consequences. And if your definition of family is protecting each other from reality, then maybe I don't want to be part of that family." The words were out before I could stop them, but I didn't want to take them back. They were true. They'd been true for years. I'd just been too afraid to say them. "Fine," Sarah said. And her voice had gone empty, flat, the way voices do when people have made decisions they won't unmake. "Fine. If that's how you feel, then we're done. I'll have my lawyer contact you about the separation papers. You can have the house. I don't want to live somewhere that reminds me of you anyway. Mom has plenty of room." "Sarah." "No," she said. "You've said what you needed to say. You've made your choice. Now I'm making mine. I hope your dignity and your new job and your precious equity are worth it, David. I hope they keep you warm at night. I hope they tell you that you did the right thing when you're sitting alone wondering why everyone you're supposed to love ended up hating you." She hung up. I stood there with the phone in my hand, listening to the dead air, and waited to feel something. Regret, maybe. Sadness. Some kind of grief for a marriage that had just ended on a sidewalk outside an office building on a Monday morning. But what I felt instead was relief. Not happiness, I wasn't happy, but relief. Like I'd been holding my breath for 4 years and could finally exhale. Like I'd been carrying weight I didn't realize was there until it was lifted. My phone buzzed again. Not Sarah this time. Jennifer, from accounting. Word is spreading. People are asking questions. Marcus left his office without taking anything. Just walked out. Some people are upset. Some people are celebrating. Thought you should know. "Thanks," I typed back. "I appreciate you keeping me informed. Are you coming back?" she asked. "Next Monday. As CTO." A pause. Then, "Good. It's about time someone who knows what they're doing ran things." I pocketed my phone and started walking. Not to my car. I wasn't ready to drive yet. Wasn't ready to navigate traffic and deal with the practical mechanics of getting from one place to another. I just walked, letting my feet carry me through streets I'd walked 1,000 times without seeing, past shops and restaurants, and the small businesses that made up the texture of the city. I walked past the coffee shop where Sarah and I used to go on Sunday mornings, back when we were still pretending we had things to talk about. Past the bookstore where I'd bought her birthday present she'd thanked me for, but never read. Past the park where we'd had our first date 8 years ago, when I'd believed that love was enough, that being good to each other mattered more than status or money, or whose family had better connections. I'd been wrong about a lot of things back then. I ended up at a bar. Not my usual kind of place. It was too early, too bright, too empty, except for a couple of day drinkers who looked like they had nowhere better to be. But I went in anyway, sat at the bar, and ordered a whiskey that cost more than it should have. The bartender was young, probably late 20s, with a kind of face that suggested he'd heard a lot of stories from a lot of people sitting exactly where I was sitting. "Rough morning?" he asked, setting the glass in front of me. "Career-defining morning," I said. "Not sure if that's rough or not." He smiled. "Those are usually the same thing. The mornings that define your career are usually the ones that feel rough at the time." I sipped the whiskey, felt it burn its way down my throat, and thought about how much truth there was in that. This morning hadn't felt triumphant. It had felt necessary. It had felt like surgery, painful but required, cutting away infected tissue so that something healthier could grow. My phone buzzed again. "Richard Chen, congratulations. You handled that beautifully. Let me buy you dinner this week. We should discuss the transition, what you'll need, how we're going to position this internally and externally." "Dinner sounds good," I typed back. "But right now, I'm at a bar at 11 a.m. drinking whiskey and trying to figure out how to feel about destroying my marriage and my brother-in-law's career in the span of 90 minutes. His response came back immediately. "You didn't destroy anything. You stopped participating in your own exploitation. That's different. But take the time you need. Call me when you're ready." I set the phone down and looked at the mirror behind the bar, at my reflection sitting in this empty space in the middle of a Monday, wearing a suit that cost too much and drinking whiskey I didn't want. The face looking back at me was the same face I'd seen that morning when I'd gotten dressed. Same features, same slight tiredness around the eyes from not sleeping well, same expression of someone trying to figure out who he was supposed to be. But something was different. Something in the eyes, maybe. Something that looked less like defeat and more like determination. "Can I give you some unsolicited advice?" the bartender asked. I shrugged. "Why not?" "Whatever just happened, and I'm not asking, I don't need to know. Don't spend today second-guessing it. Don't sit here and drink and wonder if you did the right thing. You did something. You made a choice. You moved forward. That's more than most people ever do. The morality of it, the rightness of it, that'll shake out over time. But right now, in this moment, give yourself credit for having the courage to act." I looked at him, this bartender I'd never met, who was giving me life advice like he had any idea what my life looked like. "How old are you?" I asked. 27. "And you're giving me career advice?" He grinned. "I'm a bartender on a Monday morning. I've heard every version of your story. The details change, but the shape is always the same. Someone finally stood up for themselves, and now they're sitting here wondering if they should have just stayed down. And the answer is always no. Staying down is always the wrong choice." He refilled my glass without asking. "This one's on the house, for courage. God knows we need more of it in the world." I left the bar an hour later. Not drunk, but not sober either. Just pleasantly blurred, like someone had turned down the contrast on reality and made everything slightly easier to process. My phone had continued its assault of notifications. More messages from Sarah, from her mother, from people whose numbers I vaguely recognized who wanted to know what had happened, wanted to take sides, wanted to be part of the drama. I ignored all of them and called my own mother. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright and cheerful in the way it always was when she didn't know something was wrong. "David, honey, this is a nice surprise. I was just thinking about you." "Hi, Mom," I said, and something about hearing her voice made my throat tight. "What's wrong?" Immediately, the cheerfulness replaced by concern. "What happened?" "A lot," I said. "Can I come visit you? Just for tonight. I need to be somewhere that isn't here." "Of course," she said without hesitation. "Of course you can. Are you okay? Are you safe?" "I'm safe," I said. I just made some big decisions and I need to be around someone who isn't going to judge them before I've even explained them." "Oh, honey," she said, and I could hear her moving, could picture her grabbing her keys, checking the guest room, going into the mode that mothers go into when their children need them. "Drive carefully. I'll make dinner. We'll talk about whatever you need to talk about." "Thanks, Mom. That's what I'm here for," she said. "That's what I've always been here for." The drive to my mother's house took 2 hours. 2 hours of highway and exit ramps, and the gradual transition from city to suburb to the small town where I'd grown up, where my mother still lived in the house I'd left when I was 18, and full of ambition and certainty about how the world worked. The house looked the same as it always did, small, neat, with the garden my mother tended obsessively, and the paint that always looked fresh because she touched it up every spring. It was the kind of house that felt like an apology for not being more impressive, but it was paid for, and it was hers, and she'd raised me there on a single income after my father died. She'd taught me, without meaning to, that dignity didn't come from what you owned or who you impressed. It came from how you carried yourself, how you treated people, how you refused to compromise your values for convenience. I'd forgotten that lesson somewhere along the way. Somewhere between marrying Sarah and trying to fit into her family and learning to make myself smaller so that other people could feel bigger. My mother was waiting on the porch, and when she saw me, she came down the steps and hugged me without asking questions, without demanding explanations. Just held me the way mothers hold their children when those children are hurting in ways that don't have visible wounds. "Come inside," she said finally. "Tell me everything." So I did. I sat at her kitchen table, the same table where I'd done homework as a kid, where I'd told her about getting into college, where I'd introduced her to Sarah and watched her try to hide her reservations, and I told her about Friday's coffee spill, about Marcus's cruelty, about Sarah's immediate betrayal. I told her about the weekend of preparation, about Richard Chen's offer, about the board meeting where everything I'd been building toward finally came together. I told her about destroying Marcus's career and ending my marriage before lunch on a Monday. She listened without interrupting, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long since gone cold, her face reflecting every emotion I was feeling but hadn't been able to express. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I never liked Sarah." That surprised me into laughing. "What?" "I never liked her," my mother repeated. "I tried to. I wanted to. For your sake. But she always made you smaller." She always had suggestions for how you could improve, how you could be more like her family, how you could fit better into their world. "And you tried so hard to become what she wanted that you stopped being who you were." "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because you loved her," my mother said simply. "Or you thought you did. And you were happy, or you seemed happy. And who was I to tell you that what you thought was happiness was really just comfort? That what you thought was love was really just the relief of being accepted by people you thought were better than you?" She reached across the table and took my hand. "But baby, you were always better than them. You were always more than what they saw. And I've been waiting, praying, really for you to remember that." I felt something break loose in my chest, some knot of tension I'd been carrying for so long that I'd forgotten it was there. "I don't know if I did the right thing," I said. "The right thing," my mother said, "is usually the hard thing. The comfortable thing is easy. The thing that keeps everyone happy is easy. But the right thing, the thing that requires you to stand up straight and claim your own worth, that's the thing that makes you feel like you've betrayed everyone. That's how you know you're finally putting yourself first." She squeezed my hand. "You did the right thing. And yes, people are going to be angry. Yes, your marriage is probably over. Yes, Sarah's family is going to paint you as the villain. But you know what else is true? You're free. You're finally, actually free." And sitting there in my mother's kitchen, with the afternoon light slanting through windows I'd looked through for 18 years, I realized she was right. I was free. I spent that week at my mother's house, living in my childhood bedroom like I was 17 again and trying to figure out who I was supposed to become. The room was exactly as I'd left it, posters on the walls from bands I'd loved in high school. A bookshelf full of computer science textbooks I'd kept because throwing them away felt like admitting I'd learned everything I needed to know. A desk where I'd stayed up late teaching myself to code because the future had seemed limitless back then. Everything possible. Nothing decided. The irony wasn't lost on me. Sarah's lawyer contacted me on Tuesday. The email was professional, cold, full of legal language that translated to, "Your marriage is over and here's how we're going to divide up the pieces of the life you thought you were building." She wanted the house, which I'd already agreed to, and half of everything else. The lawyer made a point of mentioning that my new equity stake would be considered marital property subject to division. Of course it would be. I forwarded the email to my own lawyer, a woman Richard Chen had recommended, who specialized in what she called high-value divorces, which apparently was what I was having now, and tried not to think about the fact that my marriage had lasted exactly 4 years and would be divided down to percentages and dollar amounts by people who'd never met us when we were happy. If we'd ever actually been happy. Wednesday, I drove back to the city to sign the formal contract with the company. Gerald was professional, almost warm, treating me like I'd always been valuable instead of someone they'd only noticed when they were about to lose me. Patricia was there too, and afterward she took me to lunch at a place that was expensive without being ostentatious. "You're going to face resistance," she said, over salads that cost $30 and were mostly air. Not just from Marcus's allies, though there will be some of those, but from the culture itself. People are comfortable. They've learned how to succeed in a system that rewards performance over competence. You're about to change that system, and change terrifies people. "I know," I said. "Do you?" She set down her fork and looked at me directly. "Because knowing it, intellectually, and experiencing it are different things. You're about to become the villain in a lot of people's stories, the person who made things harder, who raised standards, who expected actual results instead of accepting good intentions." "I can handle it." "I believe you can," Patricia said. "But I want you to understand what you're signing up for. This isn't just a job. This is a cultural overhaul, and cultural overhauls are violent even when they're necessary." She was right, of course. I knew she was right. But I also knew that I'd spent 8 years being comfortable, being accommodating, being the person who made everyone else's life easier at the expense of my own advancement. I was done with comfortable. Thursday, I went back to the house, my house, soon to be Sarah's house, to pack my things. She'd promised to be gone, to give me space, but I could feel her presence anyway in the careful arrangement of throw pillows and the absence of anything that had been mine. She'd already started erasing me, editing me out of the narrative of this house, this life. I packed efficiently: clothes, books, my computer equipment, the few things that felt like they belonged to me rather than to us. It fit in 7 boxes and 3 suitcases, which seemed like too little for 4 years of marriage, but also felt exactly right. On my way out, I stopped in the living room and looked at the spot where we'd had our last real conversation, where she'd chosen her brother over me, where I'd realized that I'd married someone who would always see me as less than, as other than, as separate from the family that actually mattered. I didn't feel angry anymore, just tired, just ready to move forward into whatever came next. Friday, Richard Chen called. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine," I said. "Staying at my mother's, finalizing the divorce, preparing for Monday." "And emotionally?" The question surprised me. Emotionally, I'm relieved. Is that wrong? "No," Richard said. "That's honest. Most people in your position would lie and say they're devastated. The fact that you're not suggests you made the right choice." "Sarah's lawyer is claiming the equity stake is marital property," I said. "It's not," Richard replied immediately. "The equity was granted after the separation. It's compensation for future work, not assets acquired during the marriage. My lawyers will handle it. Don't worry. Don't worry." As if worry was a choice. As if you could just decide not to feel the weight of everything that had happened in the span of a week. Saturday, I sat in my mother's backyard and made lists. People I needed to hire, systems I needed to audit, processes that needed to be rebuilt from the ground up. The work ahead felt enormous, impossible, exactly the kind of challenge I'd been avoiding for years because attempting it meant risking failure. But I'd already failed at the things I'd thought mattered: marriage, family, fitting in. Maybe it was time to succeed at the things I was actually good at. Sunday night, I couldn't sleep. Tomorrow, I'd walk back into that building as someone different, someone with authority, someone people would have to listen to, someone who'd finally stopped apologizing for being competent. At midnight, my phone buzzed. Jennifer from accounting. Good luck tomorrow. Everyone's watching to see what you'll do. Don't let us down. I smiled in the darkness. I won't, I typed back. Then I closed my eyes and waited for Monday. Monday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. I woke up at 5:30 in my childhood bedroom, my body remembering rhythms it had learned years ago, the particular quality of morning light through these windows. The way the floorboards creaked in a pattern I could navigate blind, the smell of my mother's coffee drifting up from the kitchen like an invitation to face the day. She was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with the newspaper spread in front of her, though I could tell she wasn't reading it. She was waiting. Mothers do that, wait in the spaces between their children's lives, ready to catch them or launch them or just witness them becoming whatever they're becoming. Big day, she said as I came down the stairs. Big day, I agreed. She poured me coffee without asking how I took it because she'd been pouring me coffee since I was 16 and thought caffeine would make me sophisticated. She knew exactly how much cream, exactly how much sugar. Some things you don't forget. You look different, she said, studying my face the way she'd studied it through 1,000 mornings, checking for fever, for sadness, for whatever invisible things only mothers could see. Different how? Taller, she said, not physically, but like you're taking up the space you're supposed to take up, instead of making yourself smaller to fit in spaces that were never meant for you. I smiled, despite the anxiety churning in my stomach. That's very poetic for 6 a.m. I've had a lot of time to think about it, she said, about how you've been folding yourself into corners for years. I'm glad you've finally decided to stand up straight. She kissed my forehead, the way she used to when I was leaving for school, when the world was smaller and all the decisions were reversible. Go show them who you've always been. Go make me proud. I'll try, I said. You won't have to try, she corrected. You'll just have to be yourself. That's always been enough. Everyone else was just too busy looking elsewhere to notice. The parking garage felt different at 7:15 on a Monday morning. Fuller, more energy. The collective momentum of people arriving for work, carrying their coffee and their ambitions, and their Monday morning optimism that this week would be different, better, more productive than the last. I parked in the executive level this time. My spot. My name on the placard temporary still, just a printed card slipped into a metal frame, but there. David Morrison, Chief Technology Officer. I sat in my car for a moment, looking at that sign, feeling the surreality of it. A week ago, I'd been parking 3 levels down, walking past this level without thinking I'd ever belong here. And now my name was next to Gerald's, next to Patricia's, next to all the other people who'd spent years climbing ladders I hadn't even known existed. The elevator ride up felt longer than it should have. I watched the numbers climb 3rd floor where my old desk had been, 5th floor where the conference rooms were, 7th floor where the executives lived in their corner offices with their expensive furniture and their views of the city. The doors opened. The executive floor was different from the rest of the building, quieter. The carpet was thicker, absorbing sound. The walls were real wood instead of veneer. The lighting was warm instead of fluorescent. Everything designed to whisper success, importance, arrival. Linda, the executive assistant who managed this floor, looked up from her desk as I approached. She was in her 50s, impeccably professional, and had seen enough executive turnover to be unimpressed by titles. Mr. Morrison, she said, standing. Welcome. Your office is ready. I've prepared an overview of your calendar, your direct reports, and the immediate priorities Mr. Chen asked me to compile. She handed me a folder, thick with information, and gestured down the hallway. Third door on the right, the corner office. It was, she paused delicately, recently vacated. Marcus's office. Of course it was Marcus's office. Because the universe had a sense of irony, or justice, or maybe just efficiency. Why waste a perfectly good corner office just because the previous occupant had imploded? "Thank you, Linda," I said. The office was exactly what I'd expected, too large, too nice, designed to impress rather than to work in, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A desk that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of mahogany. Chairs that cost more than my first car. Abstract art on the walls that Marcus had probably chosen because someone told him it was important. But Marcus's personal items were gone. The photos of him and Sarah, the awards he'd displayed, the expensive whiskey collection he'd kept in the credenza, all of it removed. The office had been scrubbed clean of his presence, leaving behind just the expensive shell. I set my bag on the desk and looked out the window at the city waking up below. From here, I could see the coffee shop where I'd sat on Saturday, drinking whiskey at 11 a.m. and trying to figure out how to feel. Could see the park where Sarah and I used to walk. Could see the streets I'd driven for 8 years, thinking I knew where I was going. My phone buzzed. Richard Chen. First day. Remember, you're not there to make friends. You're there to fix what's broken. Some people will thank you. Most won't. Do it anyway. I smiled. He had a way of saying exactly what needed to be said. There was a knock on my door. I turned to see Jennifer from accounting standing in the doorway, looking nervous but determined. "Welcome to the executive floor," she said. "I brought you something." She held out a coffee cup from the break room. The one with the broken espresso machine, the one that made mediocre cappuccinos, the one I'd been carrying when I'd spilled coffee on Marcus and changed everything. "I heard they're finally fixing the espresso machine," she said with a slight smile. "Apparently the new CTO put in a work order on his first day. First priority functional coffee." "First of many priorities," I said, taking the cup. "Thank you for this, and for keeping me informed last week." She glanced down the hallway, then stepped inside and closed the door partially. "People are nervous," she said quietly. "There are rumors you're going to clean house, that you're going to fire everyone who was loyal to Marcus." "I'm not interested in loyalty," I said. "I'm interested in competence. People who do good work have nothing to worry about. People who've been coasting on politics and connections should probably be nervous." Jennifer nodded. "That's fair. And for what it's worth, most of us are relieved. We've been watching incompetence get rewarded for years. It's exhausting, trying to do good work in a system that doesn't value it." "That ends today," I said. She smiled a real smile, not the careful professional smile people wore like armor in office buildings. "Good. We've been waiting for someone to actually fix things instead of just managing the dysfunction." After she left, I opened Linda's folder and started reading. My direct reports, 8 people, ranging from senior developers to project managers to the infrastructure team lead. Their performance reviews, their project histories, their compensation packages. The picture that emerged was depressingly familiar. The people doing actual work were underpaid and undertitled. The people who were good at managing up, at impressing executives, at presenting well, were overpaid and overpromoted. The system was exactly as broken as I'd suspected. At 8:30, Linda knocked and informed me that my team was assembled in Conference Room C for our first meeting. "Thank you," I said. "Give me 5 minutes." I took those 5 minutes to breathe, to center myself, to remember that I'd earned this, that I wasn't an imposter or a fraud or someone who'd gotten lucky. I'd built the systems that made this company valuable. I'd solved the problems that kept it running. I'd spent 8 years being excellent in the shadows. Now it was time to be excellent in the light. Conference Room C was full when I walked in. 8 faces turned toward me, curious, wary, expectant. I recognized most of them. People I'd worked with over the years, people who'd reported to Marcus, people who were probably trying to figure out where they stood in this new hierarchy. "Good morning," I said, taking my seat at the head of the table. Marcus's seat. The irony continued. "I'm David Morrison. Most of you know me. or know of me. For those who don't, I've been with his company for 8 years, most recently as a senior technical architect before my brief termination last week. A few uncomfortable smiles. They knew. Everyone knew. I'm not here to relitigate the past, I continued. I'm not interested in punishing people for their association with the previous administration. I'm interested in building systems that work, promoting people who deserve it, and fixing a culture that's been rewarding the wrong behaviors for too long. I pulled up a presentation on the screen, not PowerPoint slides, just a simple document I'd written over the weekend. These are my priorities for the next 90 days. 1. Complete audit of all current projects. I want to know what's on schedule, what's delayed, and why. 2. Reorganization of reporting structures based on actual contribution, not political relationships. 3. Implementation of new performance metrics that measure results instead of presentation skills. 4. Significant investment in training and development for people who've been overlooked. And 5. Documentation standards that ensure we never again have a situation where one person leaving causes a crisis. I looked around the table, meeting each person's eyes. I know some of you are worried. You're wondering if you're going to survive this transition. Here's how you survive. Do good work. Be honest about what you know and what you don't know. Help your colleagues instead of competing with them. Focus on creating value instead of claiming credit. One of the project managers, a man named Thomas, who I knew had been particularly close to Marcus, raised his hand. Yes, I said. What about loyalty? He asked. What about the people who've been here for years, who've built relationships, who've proven they're team players? Loyalty, I said carefully, is important. But loyalty to what? To each other? To the company's mission? Or to individuals who've been protecting their own interests at the expense of everyone else's? Thomas's jaw tightened. That's not fair. Marcus built this department. Marcus managed this department, I corrected. I built it, along with many of you in this room, and I'm not interested in debating what's fair. I'm interested in what's effective. If you can contribute to making this department effective, you'll have a place here. If you're more interested in defending the previous regime, you should probably start looking for opportunities elsewhere. The room went silent. Anyone else have questions? I asked. A woman named Rachel, one of the senior developers I'd worked with on several projects, raised her hand tentatively. Will we finally get budget approval for the infrastructure upgrades we've been requesting for 2 years? Yes, I said. Send me the proposal. If it's technically sound, you'll have approval by end of week. Her eyes widened. Just like that? Just like that. One of the benefits of actually understanding the technology is that I don't need weeks of meetings to evaluate proposals. I can read technical documentation and make informed decisions. A few smiles around the table now. People beginning to understand that things were actually going to change. One more thing, I said. I have an open-door policy, but it comes with conditions. You can come to me with problems, but bring potential solutions. You can come to me with concerns, but bring data. You can come to me with complaints about other people, but only if you've already tried to address the issue directly. I'm not here to be your therapist, or your mediator, or your friend. I'm here to make sure we build excellent systems and treat each other with respect while doing it. I stood up. That's all for now. Let's get to work. The rest of the day was a blur of meetings, of people sizing me up, of small tests to see if I meant what I'd said. By 5 p.m., I'd approved 3 project proposals that had been sitting in limbo for months. I'd reorganized 2 reporting structures. I'd had uncomfortable conversations with 4 people who'd been underperforming and knew it. I'd also promoted Rachel to senior technical lead with a 30% raise, promoted 2 other developers who'd been stuck at junior levels despite doing senior level work, and started the process of transitioning out Thomas and 2 others who'd made it clear they were more interested in loyalty to Marcus than commitment to actual work. As I was packing up to leave, there was a knock on my door. Gerald stood there, looking tired but satisfied. I've been hearing reports all day, he said. You've made more decisions in 8 hours than the previous administration made in 3 months. Is that a compliment or a concern? I asked. Both, he admitted, but mostly a compliment. This is what we needed. Someone willing to actually make changes instead of just talking about them. He paused in the doorway. David, I want you to know I should have seen what was happening. I should have questioned Marcus's promotions, his credit claiming, his performance. I failed in my oversight, and you paid the price for that failure. I'm sorry. Thank you, I said. But I'm not interested in apologies. I'm interested in making sure it doesn't happen again. He nodded. Fair enough. Welcome to the executive team. Try to get some sleep. Tomorrow will be just as intense. After he left, I sat in my office, Marcus's office, my office, and looked out at the city lights, beginning to sparkle as darkness fell. Somewhere out there, Marcus was figuring out his next move. Sarah was packing up our house, editing me out of her life. Her family was probably gathered around, reinforcing the narrative that I was the villain, the cruel one, the person who destroyed everything. Let them. I'd spent 8 years trying to fit into their story, playing the role they'd written for me. I was done with that script. It was time to write my own. The coffee was still hot when I set it down on my desk, in my office, in the company I'd helped rebuild from the inside out. No longer Marcus's space, no longer anyone's, but mine. I'd replaced the abstract art with technical diagrams, the expensive whiskey with books on systems architecture, the performance with substance. 6 months. That's how long it had taken to transform a company that rewarded appearance over achievement into one where competence actually mattered. 6 months of uncomfortable conversations, of restructuring departments, of promoting people who deserved it, and transitioning out people who'd been coasting on charm and connections. 6 months of being called the villain by people who missed the old system because the old system had protected their mediocrity. I didn't care anymore. The Cascade project expansion had launched ahead of schedule and under budget. The board was thrilled. Richard Chen's investment had paid off even faster than his projections suggested. And my additional 2% equity had vested last week, putting my ownership stake at exactly 6%, worth approximately $4 million at current valuation. Not bad for someone who'd been fired for spilling coffee. My divorce was finalized. Sarah had taken the house, half our savings, and what she'd believed was half my equity stake, until my lawyers had explained that compensation for future work wasn't marital property. She'd been furious, had tried to paint me as vindictive, had told anyone who would listen that I'd destroyed her family out of spite. Maybe she was right. Maybe I had destroyed her family. Or maybe I'd just stopped holding it together with my silence. I heard through Jennifer that Marcus had taken a job at a smaller company, a significant step down in title and salary, that he'd told people I'd sabotaged his career, that I'd been threatened by his success, that I'd engineered his downfall out of jealousy. The story he told himself, to make his failure someone else's fault. I could have corrected the narrative, could have shown people the documentation, the emails, the evidence of years of credit stealing and incompetence, but I didn't. Because Marcus's story didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the work. What mattered was building systems that lasted, creating value that couldn't be stolen, proving that excellence was its own reward even if it took years for anyone to notice. My phone buzzed. My mother, texting to remind me about dinner this weekend. She did that, now texted instead of calling, gave me space to be whoever I was becoming without needing to narrate it. I looked out my window at the city below, at the coffee shop where I'd sat 6 months ago trying to figure out how to feel about destroying my old life. I'd been scared then, uncertain, wondering if I'd made the right choice. I wasn't scared anymore. The truth is simple, really. You teach people how to treat you. For 8 years I'd taught people that I was someone who could be overlooked, undervalued, fired for spilling coffee. And they'd learned that lesson perfectly. Now I was teaching them something different. I picked up my coffee, careful, always careful now, aware of how small moments can cascade into transformations, and returned to my work. Outside, it started to rain. Somewhere in the city, someone else was probably having their coffee spill moment, their humiliation, their reckoning. I hoped they were braver than I'd been. I hoped they didn't wait 8 years to remember their own worth. But if they did wait, if they spent years being invisible before they finally stood up, well, that was fine too. Better late than never. Better transformed than comfortable. Better free.